Hey guys, tonight we are diving deep, really deep, into one of the most fascinating and misunderstood places in history, the imperial harem of the Ottoman Empire. We're going to step past the fantasies of paintings and movies, and into the real world of what was, for all intents and purposes, a golden cage. But here's the twist: we're going to see how the birds in this cage ended up running the whole zoo. And just a little heads up for you, as you step into this world, your chances of surviving the first week, let alone rising to power, are, let's just say, statistically slim. But hey, that's what makes it fun, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support means the world. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always a little magical for me to imagine this story reaching you all across the globe in different time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air outside is thick with the smell of the sea, spices, and the general hum of Istanbul, a city that feels like the center of the world. But you're not paying attention to that. All your focus is on the gate in front of you. It's called the Babu Saadi, the Gate of Felicity. A lovely name, isn't it? Sounds like something out of a fairy tale. But as you pass through it, under the watchful eyes of silent, stern-faced guards, you feel a deep final click. It's not the sound of the gate closing. It's the sound of your old world vanishing forever. You are now inside the third courtyard of the Topkapi Palace, the very heart of the Ottoman Empire. And more importantly, you are now a resident of the harem. Forget any ideas you have about a lazy, luxurious lounge filled with ladies fanning themselves. The first thing that hits you isn't the opulence, though there is plenty of that, it's the structure. This place is less of a pleasure palace and more of a highly organized, ruthlessly efficient, female-run corporation with its own brutal HR department. You're a new recruit, and you're starting at the very bottom. You're hurried along through corridors that feel like a kaleidoscope of color. The walls are covered in exquisite blue and white Isnik tiles, each one a hand-painted masterpiece. Sunlight streams through high, latticed windows, diapeling the marble floors in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air smells of jasmine, rosewater, and something else, something metallic and sharp, like ambition. You hear the soft shuffling of slippers on stone, the distant sound of a fountain, and the murmur of voices in languages you don't recognize. It's a sensory overload designed to both dazzle and disorient. You and a small group of other new girls, all wide-eyed and terrified, are led into a vast, domed hall. This is where your induction begins. And this is where you first see him, Makazi el-Gas, the chief black eunuch. He is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful men in the entire empire, second only to the Sultan and the Grand Vizier. He is the warden of this golden prison, the gatekeeper to the Sultan, and the absolute ruler of the harem, not even gracing you with a glance. But you feel his power like a physical force. His authority is absolute here. He controls the promotions, the punishments, and the flow of information. Getting on his bad side is a career-ending and sometimes life-ending move. This is your first and most important political lesson. Power doesn't always sit on a throne. Sometimes it stands in the shadows, holding the keys. This brings us to a little point of contention among historians. The word harem comes from the Arabic harem, meaning forbidden or sacred. The official line was that this was a sanctified, protected space for the Sultan's family, shielded from the profane eyes of the outside world. But was it really about sanctity, or was it about control? Historians still debate whether the harem was primarily a system of institutionalized slavery desire, non-triation tiers since the women were foreigners with no rival Turkish families to back them up, or if it genuinely began as an extension of the imperial household, only later evolving into the political powerhouse it became. Looking around at the mixture of fear and calculation in the eyes of the women you pass, you get the feeling the reality was a messy, complicated blend of both. For now you are just a girl probably captured in a raid or sold by your family, your name and past erased. You'll be given a new Turkish name, taught the language, the Quran, and the intricate etiquette of the court. You'll learn to sew, to play music, to dance. You are being remade, polished like a stone, to see if you have the potential to become a jewel. Most won't. Most will live out their days in relative comfort and obscurity, serving the more powerful women. But for a select few, serving the more powerful women, for the cleverest, the most beautiful, the most ruthless, this cage has a ladder. It's a ladder of silk pillows and whispered secrets, and it leads all the way to the top. Your first night is spent in a large shared dormitory. Lying on your thin mattress, you can hear the soft crying of some of the other girls. You stare up at the gilded ceiling, a universe away from the home you once knew. You are property now. A potential vessel. A pawn. But a pawn, you realize, on the most magnificent chessboard in the world. And in this game, even a pawn can dream of becoming a queen. The morning light filters through the high windows much softer than you expected. The soft crying from the night has subsided, replaced by a quiet, determined shuffling. There's no gentle wake-up call here. You're simply expected to be up, dressed and ready. Your education has begun, and the first lesson is discipline. You are now part of a collective, a well-oiled, slightly terrifying machine. You're assigned a menial task, perhaps polishing silver mirrors or sorting endless piles of silk in a storeroom that smells of lavender and cedar. It's boring, repetitive work, but it's a blessing in disguise. It allows you to do the one thing a newcomer must do to survive: watch and listen. You start to see the invisible lines of power that crisscross every courtyard and corridor. You see it in who gives the orders, who bows their head, and who gets the best cuts of meat at mealtime. An older girl, maybe she's been here for 5 years and her spirit is more pragmatic than broken, sees your confusion. She leans over while folding a piece of damask silk and whispers the lay of the land. Think of it as a ladder, she says, her voice barely a breath. We're all on it. Most of us are on the bottom rung. She explains the hierarchy, the silk and steel framework of your new life. You, and all the other new girls, are KIYE. It's the base level. You're trainees, interns in the Imperial Enterprise. Your job is to learn, obey, and be invisible. Above you are the K-Alpha. These are the experienced women, the supervisors. They run the dormitories, manage the kitchens, and train the newcomers. They are the tough but fair middle managers of the harem. They have their own rooms, a modest salary. The highest among them, the Uster, are masters of their craft, like the Hosind or Uster, the treasurer, who manages the harem's vast finances. She is a figure of immense administrative power. This is the career path for most. A life of service leading to a respectable position as a K-Alpha or Uster. And then, surprisingly, retirement. And here's a little detail they don't show in the paintings: the harem wasn't necessarily a life sentence for everyone. If, after 9 years of service, you still hadn't caught the Sultan's eye, or if a Sultan passed away and a new court was formed, you could be monumented. You'd be given a generous pension, a dowry, and married off to a well-positioned official or pasha outside the palace walls. It was a clever system, ensuring the loyalty of powerful men by giving them wives who were intimately educated in the ways of the court. It was the harem's own pension plan and outplacement service, all in one. But the girl continues, her eyes glinting. That's the service ladder. There's another one. A much faster, much more dangerous one. She gestures vaguely in the direction of the Sultan's private quarters. That's the ladder of favor. The first step on that ladder is to become a Jedi KLI. This means you've been noticed. Maybe the chief eunuch saw your grace in dancing, or the valet du Sultan, the Sultan's mother heard your beautiful singing. You are now privileged. You get better clothes, maybe a shared room instead of the big dorm, and you are officially on the Sultan's radar. The next rung is a leap. You become a Gozd, the one in the eye. You have been chosen to spend a night with the Sultan. You are bathed, perfumed, dressed in the finest silks, and lead down a corridor known as the Golden Road to the Sultan's private chambers. If the Sultan is pleased, he sends you a gift the next morning. Your status skyrockets overnight. You go from being one of many to being one. From there, if you continue to hold his favor, you can become an IKBL, one of the fortunate ones. You have a regular relationship with the ruler, and if you bear him a child, especially a son, your position is cemented. You become a KADN, a consort. But the true pinnacle, a position so powerful, it was essentially invented for one woman we'll meet very soon, is the Hosek-I Sultan. The chief consort, the favorite of favorites. This isn't just about being the Sultan's lover, it's about being his confidant, his apartments. The Hosek-I has her own lavish apartments, a huge stipend, and political influence that can make or break careers in the government. And above them all, serene and untouchable, sits the Valide Sultan. The Queen Mother, as the mother of the reigning Sultan, she is the official head of the harem, its absolute matriarch. Her word is law. Her power extends far beyond the harem walls, influencing policy, appointments, and even military campaigns. She is the final destination, the top of the ladder, the queen of this gilded kingdom. But was this intricate system always so clearly defined? Historians still pull out their notebooks and debate this. Some argue that in the earlier centuries the structure was much more fluid, more like a large, extended family. They suggest this highly bureaucratic, almost corporate structure we see now was actually a later development, solidifying precisely because women started gaining so much power. The system might have evolved as a way to contain and formalize their influence, rather than being the ancient framework they operated within. It's a classic chicken or egg question of Ottoman court life. You finish your work for the day, your mind buzzing with these new revelations. The path ahead seems impossibly steep, a climb where one misstep could send you tumbling back to the bottom or worse. You don't just see fellow prisoners. You see rivals. You see potential allies. Every shared meal, every polite conversation is now a potential move on this complex, invisible chessboard. The fear from last night is still there. But now it's mixed with something new, something sharp and potent, a flicker of ambition. Days blend into weeks, and the initial shock wears off, replaced by a routine that is both monotonous and strangely comforting. You've learned the basic courtesies, the right way to serve a tiny cup of coffee without your hands shaking. You're becoming part of the scenery, which is the safest thing to be for now. And from this vantage point, you begin to observe the center of this entire universe, the Sultan himself. His name is whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear. He is the Padishah, the shadow of God on earth, the ruler of the two seas and the two lands. When he moves through the palace, it's not just a man walking, it's an event. A wave of silence precedes him. Doors are opened. Heads are bowed. Everything and everyone rearranges itself around his presence. You catch your first glimpse of him from a distance, through a lattice screen, as he crosses a courtyard. HES dressed in magnificent silks and furs, even in the mild weather. HES surrounded by a retinue of officials. The Grand Vizier, his Poshaus, all of them powerful men who rule a vast empire, yet they walk a few respectful paces behind him, their heads slightly inclined. His every gesture seems significant, every word a command that could change the lives of millions. His life from the outside seems like the ultimate fantasy. He commands armies, builds mosques that pierce the sky, and lives in unparalleled luxury. The finest artisans, poets, and musicians in the world are at his beck and call. He eats from porcelain dishes so precious they were rumored to change color if they came into contact with poison, a very real and practical concern for a man in his position. And here's a quirky little detail about that: the palace kitchens were a city unto themselves. There were specialized cooks for everything. One chef was the master of pilafs, another of desserts, another of desserts, another of sherbets. The Sultan's bread was baked in a separate guarded kitchen. The fear of being poisoned was so profound that a whole team of officials, called the CESNGIR, or tasters, would sample every single dish before it reached the Sultan's lip. Imagine a whole career based on being a professional food taster, where the stakes are life and death. It's the ultimate high-risk, high-reward culinary job. But, as you spend more time in the palace, you begin to see the other side of the coin. The Sultan is also a prisoner. His cage is just bigger and more lavishly decorated than yours. From the moment he wakes, his day is a series of rigid rituals. The ceremony of being dressed, the public prayers, the long hours spent in the imperial council, listening to petitions and reports from every corner of the empire from Budapest to Baghdad. He rarely leaves the palace grounds, and when he does, it's a massive, formal procession. He has no privacy, no anonymity. And then there's the most gilded part of his cage, the law of fratricide. For centuries, Ottoman succession was a brutal, bloody affair. The old Turkish principle was the throne is for the one who can take it. This meant that when a sultan died, all his sons had an equal claim, and they would often race to the capital to be declared the new ruler. The winner would then, as a matter of state policy, have all his brothers and their sons executed to prevent civil war. It was a practice officially sanctioned by Mehmed the Conqueror, who declared, for the good of the state, the one of my sons to whom God grants the sultanate may lawfully execute his brothers. This created a paradox. While the sultan was alive, his sons, the princes or Shahzads, were raised in incredible luxury but also in constant, terrifying competition. Every brother was a potential rival, a future executioner. So you start to see the sultan not just as a ruler, but as a survivor of a deadly family drama. This system began to change over time, morphing into something almost as cruel. Instead of executing the princes, they were locked away in a special part of the palace called the kafes, the cage. It was a set of luxurious apartments where they lived in splendid isolation, guarded day and night, with no contact with the outside world. They couldn't have children. They couldn't hold any position of power. They just waited. If the reigning sultan died without an heir, the oldest prince would be brought out of the kafes and placed on the throne, often blinking in the sunlight, completely unprepared, sometimes mentally unstable after years of solitary confinement. Historians are still in a heated debate about the true impact of the kafes. One school of thought argues that it was a humane, unnecessary reform that ended the bloodshed of fratricide and stabilized the succession process. But another, more critical view is that the kafes was the single greatest cause of the empire's later decline. It produced a series of weak, incompetent, and often paranoid rulers who had no experience in governance, military affairs, or basic human interaction before suddenly being handed the most powerful job in the Islamic world. Did it save lives only to cripple the dynasty? The question hangs over the glittering domes of the palace. So you look at the Sultan, this magnificent, all-powerful man, and you see the truth. His power is absolute. But he is also a product of this ruthless system. He is isolated, surrounded by people who both fear and need him, and haunted by the ghosts of his own family. He is the sun around which our world orbits, but even the sun has its own shadows. And it's in those shadows that the real game is played. You realize that to influence the empire, you don't need to sit on the throne. You just need to get close enough to whisper in the Sultan's ear. Life in the harem continues at steady, rhythmic pace. You've learned who to avoid, who to befriend, and how to make yourself useful without being too noticeable. The great game of power seems distant, a drama played out by the senior women. You are still just part of the chorus. But then, one day, the composition of the harem and the future of the entire empire is changed by the arrival of a single girl. She arrives with a shipment of other slaves, part of the spoils of a raid in Ruthenia, a region that's now part of modern-day Ukraine. In a sea of frightened, tear-stained faces, she is different. She isn't crying. Her head isn't bowed. She has fiery red hair, a feature so unusual he would immediately draw stares. Her eyes, a shade of green, are not downcast, they are scanning, observing, calculating. There's a spark of defiance in her that is both terrifying and mesmerizing. Her given slave name is Roxolana, the Ruthenian one. But later, the Sultan will give her a new name, one that will echo through history. It means the cheerful one or laughing one. It's a name that perfectly captures her spirit, because one of her most potent, and initially most scandalous, weapons is her laughter. In a place defined by demure silence and whispered courtesies, her rem laughs, openly, joyfully. It's a sound that cuts through the perfumed air of the harem like a thunderclap. At first, the other women and the eunuchs don't know what to make of her. They see her as a coarse, uncultured barbarian. They try to put her in her place, to sound down her rough edges and make her conform. But her harem refuses to be sanded down. She learns Turkish with astonishing speed, but she speaks it with an impish wit that charms some and infuriates others. She absorbs the teachings of Islam, but she discusses them with an intelligence that surprises her tutors. She quickly realizes that being just another pretty face is a ticket to obscurity. She needs to be noticed by the one person who matters. The reigning sultan is Suleiman, a man who will become known to the West as the Magnificent and to his own people as the Lawgiver. He is a brilliant military strategist, a poet, and a ruler at the absolute zenith of his powers. He is also a young man, and he is intrigue. She becomes a ghost, the girl in the eye. She is prepared for her first night with the Sultan, but even here, she plays the game differently. Instead of being a passive recipient of his favor, she engages him. She talks to him about poetry, he wrote it, about politics, he ran an empire, about his day. She makes him not as a god-king, but as a man. And for Suleiman, who has been surrounded by sycophants and trembling servants his entire life, this is intoxicating. This, of course, creates a huge problem. The Sultan already has a chief consort, a beautiful and respected woman named Mahidevran. She is the mother of the eldest prince, Mustafa, the heir apparent. Mahidevran is everything a consort is supposed to be: graceful, serene, from a noble background, and respectful of tradition. She sees her harem as a vulgar little upstart, a temporary infatuation, but she quickly realizes this is something more. The Sultan is spending more and more time with the Russian wit, as her detractors call her. The rivalry escalates. A famous, though possibly embellished, story tells of a physical altercation. Mahidevran, in a fit of rage, confronts her harem, scratching her face and tearing her hair, telling her she is nothing but bought flesh. When her harem is summoned to the Sultan's chambers that evening, she refuses to go. The eunuch insists, but she holds her ground, saying she cannot present herself to her master in such a state of disarray and disrespect. Refusing a summons is unthinkable. But it works. Intrigued, Suleiman demands to know why, and the story of the attack comes out. His sympathy and his affection shift decisively towards her harem. Mahidevran is sidelined. Was this confrontation real? It's one of those historiodramatic it feels like it should be true. But historians are divided. Some records from the time mention it, particularly reports from Venetian ambassadors who were obsessed with harem intrigue. Others are silent. It could be a true story, a dramatic exaggeration of a real rivalry, or a piece of clever propaganda spread by her harem's own-growing faction to justify her rise and Mahidevran's fall. The truth is likely buried under centuries of rumor and legend. What is certain is that her harem has done the impossible. She has gone from being an anonymous slave girl to the Sultan's undisputed favorite. She has outmaneuvered the established consort, broken the rules, and captured the powerful man in the world, but she knows that a sultan's heart is a fickle thing. Favor is temporary. To secure her position, she needs more than just his love. She needs power, and she's just getting started. Her EMS position is now secure, but it is not unbreakable. In the world of the harem, the only real insurance policy is a son. She has Suleiman's heart, but Mahidevran still holds a trump card. She is the mother of the eldest prince and heir Mustafa. Her harem knows that if Suleiman were to die, she and any children she might have would be at the mercy of the new Sultan Mustafa and his mother. Her survival, and the survival of her lineage, depends on changing the game entirely. And so, she does. She bears Suleiman a son, Mehmed. Then another, Abdullah, who dies in childhood. Then Selim, then Bey Ziyad, and then a daughter, Mi'Chaimo. Finally, a fifth son, Sihan Gioio. She has filled the royal nursery. This alone is a monumental achievement, solidifying her status as a Kadn, a full consort. But her harem is not content with just being one of the mothers of princes. She wants to be the mother of the prince. Her relationship with Suleiman deepens beyond the bedchamber. He finds in her an intellectual equal. He values her advice. They write poetry to each other. He calls her his one and only, his queen. But this unprecedented intimacy is still confined within the traditional boundaries of the harem. Her harem is his favorite concubine, but she is still, legally, his slave, a cherished and powerful slave, but a slave nonetheless. Then, Suleiman does something that sends a shockwave through the entire Ottoman court and breaks nearly 2 centuries of imperial tradition. He decides to marry her. This is simply not done. Since the 14th century, after the disastrous Battle of Ankara, where the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I was captured and his Serbian wife, a Christian princess, was reportedly humiliated by the conqueror Timur, the sultans had stopped taking noble women or foreign princesses as legal wives. They relied exclusively on the system of slave concubines to produce heirs. The logic was cold but clear: a slave had no powerful family to interfere in politics, no rival allegiances. Her only loyalty was to the Sultan, her master and the father of her children. To marry a concubine was to elevate her to a status no one had held in generations. It would make her a free woman, a legal wife, the Hosek-I Sultan in title as well as in fact. But first, there was a legal and religious hurdle. A Muslim man cannot marry his own slave. So in a stunning public act, Suleiman first grants her freedom. He manumits her. For a brief, terrifying period, harem is a free woman in the palace. According to Islamic law, as a free Muslim woman, she can no longer have a relationship with the Sultan outside of marriage. She politely and respectfully withdraws from his bed. She has, with this one move, forced his hand. He can either lose her or marry her. The court is in an uproar. The Sultan's mother, Hafsa Sultan, who had been a moderating influence and had managed the rivalry between Harem and Mahidevran, is reportedly aghast. The Paz-Hazm Viziers can't believe it. They see this as a subversion of the very foundations of the dynasty. This foreign slave girl with her strange ways has bewitched their body shot. But Suleiman, the lawgiver, the ruler of a world-spanning empire, is resolute. He is in love. The wedding, which takes place around 1533 or 1534, is an event of staggering proportions. While the ceremony itself is private, the celebration is not. The city of Istanbul erupts in festivities. There are parades, feasts for the public, and dazzling fireworks displays over the Golden Horn. It's a public declaration. Harem is not just some favorite hidden away in the harem. She is the Sultan's wife, his queen. Here's a curious little piece of palace trivia that highlights the change. Before harem, the favorite concubines received a daily stipend and ASLK. It was a generous amount, but it was essentially an allowance. After the marriage, Suleiman creates a new, formal income for harem, ahas, which were revenues from specific crown lands. She is no longer receiving pocket money. She has her own independent, royal income, making her one of the wealthiest women in the empire overnight. She now has the financial resources to match her political ambitions. The marriage solidifies her power but also makes her enemies. By becoming a legal wife, she has leapfrogged over everyone. Mahidevran is now completely marginalized, eventually being sent away from the capital to a provincial post with her son Mustafa, a traditional move for mothers of princes, as they came of age to govern provinces. Harem remains in the capital, at the Sultan's side. This is another broken tradition. The mother of a prince was supposed to accompany him to his post. She has no intention of being a provincial queen in waiting. She is the queen, right here, right now. But did this marriage truly happen in the way we imagine a royal wedding? The historical record is surprisingly thin on the exact details of the ceremony itself. Most of what we know comes from the reports of foreign observers, like the Venetian and Genoese ambassadors, who were scrambling to make sense of this shocking development. Ottoman chronicles of the time, perhaps out of deference to the controversial nature of the event, are more reserved. Historians still debate the exact legal and ceremonial proceedings. Was it a grand public affair as the foreign reports suggest, or a more private, albeit legally binding, contract that was then celebrated publicly? The discrepancy reminds us that history is often written by outsiders looking in, trying to interpret events through their own cultural lens. Harem has won. She has gone from slave to wife, from concubine to queen. She has a new name and new status and the unwavering devotion of the Sultan. She has achieved the impossible. But in doing so, she has also set a dangerous precedent. She has shown everyone that the old rules no longer apply. The ladder in the golden cage now has a new express route to the top. And in the Game of Thrones, when you break the rules, you have to be prepared for the consequences. The enemies she has made are powerful, and they are patient. Now a free woman and the Sultan's legal wife, Hurrem is no longer just a resident of the harem, she's one of its masters. But she understands that true power isn't just about titles or proximity to the Sultan. It's about information and influence. She needs her own people, a network of eyes, ears, and hands that extend beyond the harem walls and into the nerve center of the empire, the Imperial Council, known as the Divan. This is where you start to see her genius for political maneuvering. She doesn't operate with brute force. She operates like a master weaver, slowly and patiently spinning a web of alliances, patronage, and intelligence. Her primary instrument is her daughter, Mihr Sultan. Born a princess, Mihr is intelligent, educated, and utterly devoted to her mother. Hurrem sees that her daughter can be more than just a royal ornament, she can be a key player. At the tender age of 17, Mihr is married off. But this is no ordinary arranged marriage. Her groom is Rustam Pasha, a rising star in the administration. He is ambitious, cunning, and most importantly completely loyal to Hurrem. The marriage elevates Rustam to a position of immense power. As the Sultan's son-in-law Damat, he is brought into the innermost circle of the court. A few years later, with her EM's subtle lobbying, Suleiman appoints Rustam Pasha as the Grand Vizier, the second most powerful man in the empire. Suddenly, Hurrem has a direct line into the Divan, the meetings where the fate of the empire is decided, where war is declared and treaties are signed, are no longer a black box to her. Through Rustam, she has a voice and a vote. Through Mihr, who often confers with her husband, she has a loyal agent ensuring her interests are represented. Mother, daughter, and son-in-law form a powerful political triangle, a shadow government operating in perfect sync. You would see this play out in subtle ways. A provincial governor who has spoken ill of Hurrem might suddenly find himself recalled to the capital to face trumped-up charges of corruption. An official loyal to her faction might receive a promotion to a lucrative post. The currency of this network is favor and information, and Hurrem was a master at gathering information. The harem itself was an intelligence agency. The hundreds of women and eunuchs were a constant source of gossip, observation, and secrets. A serving girl might overhear a conversation between two visiting posses. A eunuch guard might see who was visiting whom late at night. All of this information flowed upwards, channeled through the harem hierarchy, and ultimately landed in Hurrem's ears. She knew who was in debt, who was having an affair, who was secretly ambitious. This information was ammunition to be stored and used at the perfect moment. Here's a fascinating, and slightly weird, little detail about harem communication. To send secret messages that can be easily intercepted, they sometimes used embroidery. A seemingly innocent pattern on a handkerchief or a scarf could contain a coded message. The choice of flower, the color of the thread, the number of stitches all could signify something to the intended recipient. It was steganogary in silk, a beautiful and almost untraceable way to conspire in plain sight. You could be admiring a lovely piece of needlework that was actually a secret order to buy a certain property or a warning about arrival. Hurrem also cultivates relationships outside the palace. She corresponds with the Kira, the influential Jewish businesswoman who acted as intermediaries between the cloistered women of the harem and the outside world. Through them, she manages her vast fortune, investing in businesses and real estate, further increasing her financial independence and her network of contacts in the bustling markets of Istanbul. But is it fair to portray Hurrem as this lone, brilliant mastermind single-handedly manipulating the entire state? This is where historians often pump the brakes. The idea of the scheming harem woman is a very old trope, often used by male chroniclers of the time and later historians to explain away political outcomes they didn't like. It was easier to blame the unnatural influence of a woman than to admit to failures in governance or the complexities of court politics. Many modern historians argue that Hurrem was not operating in a vacuum. She was the leader of a political faction, She had allies who supported her because their interests aligned. Rustam Pasha was a capable administrator in his own right. His promotion wasn't just because of his marriage. This more nuanced view suggests harem was less a puppet master pulling all the strings and more the charismatic and brilliant CEO of a political enterprise, building coalitions, unrewarding loyalty. The evil temptress narrative, they argue, is a simplistic and often misogynistic interpretation of a far more complex political reality. You see this web taking shape around you. You notice that certain officials who visit the palace are treated with more deference by harem staff. You see supplies for the harem being purchased from specific merchants, friends of the Kira, no doubt. You see a young, talented architect receiving a commission for a small project after being recommended by a K-alpha known to be close to harem. It's all connected. Nothing is random. Harem has transformed the harem from a gilded cage into a common center. She is Herman in the Grand Vizier's office, her daughter as his influential wife, and a network of informants that reaches into every corner of the palace and the city. She is no longer just reacting to events. She is shaping them. The red-haired girl from Ruthenia is no longer playing the game. She is starting to design the board. Her EMS influence has now grown far beyond the palace walls, and even beyond the borders of the Ottoman Empire itself. She begins to do something truly audacious, something no concubine, or even imperial wife had ever systematically done before she engages in international diplomacy. From her lavish apartments in the heart of the harem, a place designed to keep women hidden from the world, harem starts to reach out to the world. She begins a correspondence with the crowned heads of Europe and the powerful sheikhs of the East. This isn't just an exchange of pleasantries. This is statecraft. One of her most significant pen pals is Seismijdan II Augustus, the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. This makes a lot of sense. Ruthenia, her birthplace, was under polished Lithuanian rule, so she had a personal connection and a deep understanding of the region's politics. Her letters to him are masterpieces of soft power. She congratulates him on his ascension to the throne, sends him luxurious gifts, sometimes a pair of fine linen shirts and embroidered handkerchiefs. A subtle reminder of her personal touch, and expresses her desire for perpetual peace between their two great states. In one surviving letter, she writes with a tone of confident partnership, "We have heard that you are a sovereign who is firm and courageous, God willing. Your royal majesty, with the help of God the Most High, will henceforth be ever victorious." This isn't just a friendly note. It's a political signal. She is reassuring a powerful neighbor of the Ottoman Empire's goodwill. And she's doing it personally. When the Polish king sends an ambassador, he is instructed to seek an audience not just with the Sultan and his vizier, but also with her harem. European powers quickly learn that to have a good relationship with the Ottomans, you need to be on good terms with her. And here's a quirky little side note on that: these letters were a huge deal logistically. They were written in Ottoman Turkish, in elegant calligraphy, then translated by the court's official translators Dragomanes. They were sealed with her personal seal, placed in ornate containers, and sent via special envoys on a long and often dangerous journey across Europe. The arrival of a letter from the Queen of the Turks in a European court was a major event, a piece of political theater in itself. She also corresponds with the leaders of Persia, the Ottomans' great rival to the east. But perhaps her most fascinating exchange is with a woman who was, in many ways, her counterpart, the sister of the Shah of Persia. These letters are more personal, a rare glimpse into a relationship between two of the most powerful women in the Islamic world, separated by a bitter political and religious divide. The Ottomans were Sunni, the Persians were Shia. They lament the constant warfare between their states and express a shared hope for peace, a kind of female-led diplomatic back channel. But was harem acting as an independent foreign minister? This is where the historical debate gets lively. Some traditional historians view her activities as a dangerous usurpation of power. They argue that she was meddling in affairs that should have been left to the Sultan and the Divan, and that her personal feelings, her lingering fondness for her homeland, for instance, could have improperly influenced state policy. They see it as more proof of her unnatural control over the besotted Sultan. However, a more modern perspective, championed by many contemporary scholars, offers a different interpretation. They argue that harem was not acting against the state, but for it, in perfect concert with Suleiman. Suleiman was a brilliant statesman. He knew exactly what she was doing and he approved. Her letters were not rogue diplomacy, but a carefully calibrated to love Ottoman foreign policy. She was the soft power arm of his government. While he commanded armies and made treaties, she built relationships, gathered intelligence, and sent signals that a male ruler couldn't. It was a sophisticated good cop, bad cop strategy on an international scale. He was the iron fist of the empire, she was its velvet glove. You can feel this new dimension of power emanating from her quarters. Sometimes you'll see a foreign-looking envoy, dressed in strange furs or silks, being discreetly led not to the council chambers, but towards the harem's administrative wing for a meeting with one of her harem's high-ranking eunuchs. You hear whispers of gifts arriving from far-off lands, a bolt of Flemish lace, a cleverly made German clock, a caged parrot that speaks a language no one understands. These are not just trinkets. They are tributes. They are tributes. They are acknowledgments from the kings and queens of the world that a new power has established itself in the heart of the Ottoman court. Her harem has managed to turn her gilded cage into a global communications hub. She is proving that you don't need a throne or a council seat to change the world. Sometimes all you need is a pen, some paper, and the audacity to write to a king as if you were his equal. Her harem has secured her position through marriage, built a political network, and even established herself as a player on the world stage. But she understands that political power can be fleeting. It can vanish with the death of a sultan or a shift in courtly favor. To truly cement her legacy, she needs something more permanent. She needs to build. She needs to etch her name into the very stones of the empire's capital. So she embarks on a massive program of public works, using her enormous personal wealth and influence to commission buildings that will serve the people, glorify God, and, not coincidentally, immortalize the name of her harem sultan. This was a traditional domain of male rulers, but her harem enters it with an ambition that rivals any sultan before her. You can imagine her overseeing the plans with the imperial architects, perhaps even the legendary Mimar Sinan, the Michelangelo of the Ottoman world. She's not just signing off on the funds, she is involved. The complex, when completed, is a marvel. It's not just a mosque. It includes a madrasa, a religious school, an Imarita public soup kitchen, and a bimarist and a hospital. Let's linger on the soup kitchen for a moment, because it was a brilliant piece of public relations. Every single day, the Hosekai harem Sultan Imarit would feed hundreds of the city's poor. It served 2 meals a day, providing hearty, nutritious food, soup, bread, and often a meat or rice meal off to anyone who came, no questions asked. It fed students, travelers, and the destitute. Her harem's name became associated not just with power and intrigue in the palace, but with charity and piety on the street. She was feeding the city. The prayers and goodwill of thousands of common people became a shield, a source of legitimacy that her enemies in the court could not easily penetrate. And then there's the hospital. It was a proper, functioning medical center, open to all, male or female, rich or poor, Muslim male, rich or poor, Muslim or non-Muslim. It had physicians and pharmacists on staff. And here's a truly amazing and forward-thinking detail according to the Foundation's charter. The hospital was specifically instructed to have a dedicated women's section and to employ female medical practitioners to care for female patients. In the 16th century, this was revolutionary. It showed a concern for women's healthcare and modesty that was far ahead of its time. Her harem wasn't just building for prestige, she was addressing real social needs, particularly those of women. She doesn't stop in Istanbul. She commissions projects across the empire. She funds the restoration of mosques in Jerusalem and the construction of caravanserais roadside inns on the pilgrimage route to Mecca and Medina. She builds public baths, fountains, and bridges. Every one of these projects serves a dual purpose. It's a public good, but it's also a permanent advertisement for her power and piety. Her seal is on the deeds. Her name is in the inscriptions. But could a woman, even the Sultan's wife, truly command such massive architectural undertakings on her own? This is a point of academic discussion. The traditional view is that these were her harem's projects, full stop. However, some historians propose a more collaborative model. They argue that these projects were likely joint ventures between Hurrem and Suleiman, a way for the imperial couple to showcase their shared vision and piety. Suleiman's name and authority would have been essential to secure the land, the labor, and the cooperation of the imperial bureaucracy. This perspective doesn't diminish Hurrem's role, but it reframes it. It suggests she was the driving force and the public face of these charitable endeavors, while Suleiman provided the official backing. It was a partnership. The debate centers on the degree of her autonomy. Was she the sole CEO of this massive charitable foundation, or was she the extraordinarily powerful executive director, working in tandem with the chairman of the board, the Sultan himself? Back in the palace, you see the tangible results of this work. Architects and engineers are now part of the regular flow of visitors to her wing of the harem. You see drafts and plans laid out on low tables, intricate drawings of domes and minarets. You overhear conversations about the quality of marble from a certain quarry or the challenge of getting water to a new fountain. The harem is no longer just a place of intrigue, it's a center for urban planning and philanthropy. Harem is using the tools of the patriarchy, wealth and construction, things normally associated with mentor-builder female-centric legacy. The stones of her buildings are rising all over the city, a testament to her power that will outlast all the whispers and rumors of the court. She has fed the poor, healed the sick, and sheltered the traveler. Her enemies might call her a witch in the palace, but on the streets of the empire, she is becoming a saint. The joyous sounds from the royal nursery and the rising stone of her harem's mosques cannot mask a growing tension within the palace. It's a silent, creeping dread that every person in the court feels. They are young men, handsome, ambitious, and trained in the arts of war and governance. And in the Ottoman Empire, a surplus of capable princes is not a blessing, it's a slow ticking time bomb. The board is set with three main players. First, there is Said Mustafa, the eldest son of the Sultan and the child of her old rival, Mohi Devran. Mustafa is, by all accounts, the perfect prince. He is charismatic, a skilled warrior beloved by the elite Janissary Corps, and a talented administrator, who is governing his province of Man is with great success. The people in the army adore him. He is the clear favorite, the heir apparent in every earnest eyes but her EMS. For her, he is the single greatest threat to her and her children. If Mustafa becomes Sultan, her sons will almost certainly be executed under the law of fratricide, and she will be cast aside. Then there are Hurrem's own sons. The eldest and her favorite is Mehmet, who is intelligent and gentle. But her hopes also lie with the other Selim, who is perhaps more fond of poetry and wine than of governing Bey-e-Zid, who is fiery, ambitious, and a skilled soldier, much like his half-brother Mustafa Sihingiil, the youngest, who is brilliant and beloved by his father, but physically frail, born with a hunchback that disqualifies him from the brutal competition for the throne. Hurrem knows that she cannot leave the succession to chance or tradition. She must actively clear a path for one of her own. The game becomes one of whispers, of carefully planted rumors, and of manipulating the Sultan's perception. The alliance she built with her Ottoman and her son-in-law, the Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, now becomes her primary weapon. They begin a subtle but relentless campaign to undermine Mustafa. Rustam Pasha, from his position in the divan, can control the flow of information that reaches the Sultan. A minor administrative error in Mustafa's province might be reported to Suleiman as a sign of incompetence. A report of the prince's popularity with the soldiers is framed not as a testament to his charisma, but as a dangerous sign of his personal ambition, a hint that he is building his own power base to perhaps challenge his father. Here's a small, insidious detail about how this worked. The court was obsessed with ceremony and protocol. A slight deviation could be interpreted as a grave insult or a sign of rebellion. The anti-Mustafa faction might, for example, send a deliberately ambiguous instruction to the prince regarding a state ceremony. If he follows it one way, they can claim he is being disrespectful. If he follows it the other way, they can claim he is overstepping his authority. It's a political catch-22, designed to make him look bad no matter what he does. The whispers grow louder. Mustafa is becoming too powerful. The Janissaries love him too much. They are saying he would make a better sultan than his aging father. Is he planning a rebellion? Is he conspiring with the Habsburgs or the Persians? The tension reaches a breaking point during a campaign against Persia. Suleiman is leading the army. Mustafa, commanding his own provincial troops, joins his father on the campaign trail. This should be a moment of unity, a father and son fighting side by side. Instead, it becomes a trap. Rustam Pasha and Hurrem convince Suleiman that Mustafa is coming not to aid him, but to usurp him, to use his loyal troops to seize the throne, while the main army is distracted. They might have forged letters supposedly from Mustafa to the Shah of Persia, promising a collaboration. The evidence is murky, likely fabricated, but in the paranoid atmosphere of the court, it is enough. Suleiman, a ruler who has always put the stability of the state above all else, even family is convinced. He summons his son to his campaign tent. Friends warn Mustafa not to go. They tell him it's a trap. But Mustafa, perhaps naively believing in his own innocence and his father's love, goes. He is, after all, the Sultan's son. As he enters the magnificent imperial tent, he is met not by his father, but by a chilling silence. He pushes through the first few chambers. Then in the innermost chamber, he is set upon by the Boston CS, the imperial guards who also served as the Sultan's executioners. These are deaf mutes, chosen for the task so they could never hear or speak of the secrets they were privy to. There is a brief, terrible struggle. The perfect prince, the hope of the empire, is strangled with a silk bowstring, the traditional method for executing royalty so that no royal blood is spilled. Was Hurrem directly responsible for orchestrating Mustafa's death? This is one of the most hotly debated questions in Ottoman history. Her contemporary critics and many later historians paint her as the villain, the ruthless puppet master who poisoned a father's mind against his own son for the sake of her own ambition. They point to the campaign of whispers led by her and Rustam Pasha as clear evidence of a conspiracy. However, other historians argue this is too simplistic. They suggest Suleiman was no one's fool. He was an experienced and often ruthless ruler who had executed close friends before when he felt the state was threatened. He may have made the decision on his own, based on his own fears of a Janissary-backed coup, a very real threat in Ottoman politics. Hurrem and her faction didn't create the suspicion out of thin air, they merely amplified existing fears that were already present in Suleiman's mind. They didn't pull the strings, they just pointed out which strings were looking frayed. The news of Mustafa's execution causes an uproar. The Janissaries are on the verge of open rebellion. Suleiman has to personally face them down and execute a few of their leaders to restore order. He even has to dismiss his Grand Vizier, Rustam Pasha, for a time to placate the public anger, though he is reinstated a couple of years later. The empire is shaken. Hurrem has won. The path is now clear for her sons. But it is a victory that costs her dearly in the court of public opinion. She is now seen by many as a sinister, power-hungry sorceress who destroyed the dynasty's brightest star. The cheerful one, the laughing one, is now associated with the darkest of deeds. The chessboard is cleared of her greatest rival, but the blood on the board will never truly wash away. The ghost of Prince Mustafa looms large over the court, a constant, unspoken reminder of the brutal cost of power. Hurrem has achieved her primary goal, the succession is now guaranteed to pass to one of her sons. But her victory feels hollow, and the empire is uneasy. The golden age of Suleiman feels slightly tarnished. Hurrem herself is aging. The fiery young girl from Ruthenia is now mature, powerful matriarch in her 50s. The years of constant struggle, of bearing 6 children, and of navigating the deadly politics of the court have taken their toll. In 1558, Hurrem Sultan, the Laughing One, Zilan dies in the arms of her beloved Suleiman. Her death plunges the Sultan, and the court she so thoroughly dominated, into a profound grief. Suleiman, the magnificent conqueror, is said to have been inconsolable. He buries her in a magnificent tomb at Tulb, next to the grand mosque he built, the Suleiman-Iye. It is the resting place of a queen, right next to her king. For a time, it seems the era of female influence might have died with her. The harem is quiet, leaderless. But the systems harem put in place, the precedent she set, did not vanish. She had shown what was possible. She had created the role of the Hosekai Sultan and turned it into a position of supreme power. She had demonstrated that a woman could rule from within the harem. The door she had kicked open did not close behind her. It was merely waiting for the next ambitious woman to walk through it. That woman arrives not as a fiery storm like her harem, but as a gentle Venetian breeze. Her name is Cecilia Venia Biafo. She is said to be the illegitimate daughter of two powerful Venetian noble families. Like her harem, she is captured at sea by Ottoman corsairs and brought to the harem as a slave. And like her harem, she is beautiful, intelligent, and possesses a quiet strength. In the harem, she is given the name En'erbenyu, which means Princess of Light. She is assigned to the household of Prince Selim, her EM's second and now eldest surviving son. His older brother Mehmed had died of smallpox years earlier. Selim is not the warrior his half-brother Mustafa was, nor the fiery poet his younger brother Bayezid is. He is seen as less capable, more interested in the pleasures of the palace than the duties of the state. He will later be known, rather unflatteringly, as Selim the Salt or Selim the Blonde because of his fair hair and his reputed love of wine. But En'erbenyu sees potential. Or at least she sees an opportunity. She becomes his favorite, his chief consort, and the mother of his eldest son, Murad. She is not like her harem. She is not a disruptor who laughs in the face of tradition. She is a consolidator, a quiet manager. She uses her intelligence not to challenge the system, but to master it. She becomes Selim's rock, his most trusted advisor, managing his princely household with quiet efficiency. The real test comes after her EM's death, when the rivalry between her two remaining sons, Selim and Bayezid, erupts into open civil war. It's the nightmare scenario the law of fratricide was designed to prevent. Bayezid is the more capable soldier, the more popular choice, much like Mustafa had been. Selim is the less popular, but he has two things in his favor. He is the elder, and he has the unwavering support of his father, Sulaiman, who now sees Bayezid's ambition as a threat. Sulaiman sides with Selim, and Bayezid is defeated in battle. He flees with his sons to the court of the Persian Shah, seeking refuge. It's a fatal mistake. Sulaiman, in a final, ruthless act of statecraft, pays the Shah an enormous sum of gold to obey Bayezid and all his sons executed. The path is now completely, unequivocally clear for Selim. When Sulaiman the Magnificent finally dies in 1566 on a campaign in Hungary, Selim II ascends to the throne. And beside him, rising to the pinnacle of the harem, is En'erbenyu. She is now the Hosekai Sultan, just as her harem was, but she takes the role to a new level. Because Selim is a less active ruler than his father, he delegates. He is happy to let his brilliant wife, En'erbenyu, run the affairs of the harem and wield enormous influence behind the scenes. Here's an interesting little tidbit about the transition of power. When a sultan died, especially on a campaign far from the capital, the news was kept secret for as long as possible to prevent chaos or a succession crisis. When Sulaiman died in his tent, the Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha kept his death a secret for over 3 weeks while the army marched back towards Istanbul. He had the Sultan's doctors poisoned to ensure their silence and issued commands in the dead Sultan's name. It was a masterful, if macabre, piece of stage management to ensure a smooth transition for Selim. The relationship between En'erbenyu and her native Venice is a source of constant debate for historians. Was she a Venetian agent in the Ottoman court? The more romantic, conspiratorial view is that she never forgot her roots and secretly worked to benefit the Venetian Republic, her true home. The Venetian ambassadors certainly thought so, and in their reports, they referred to her as our woman and bragged about her influence. They sent her lavish gifts and cultivated a close relationship with her. However, most serious historians today find this unlikely. They argue that En'erbenyu was a pragmatist. Her power, her wealth, and the future of her son were all tied to the strength and stability of the Ottoman Empire. She would not have jeopardized that for some sentimental attachment to a homeland she barely remembered. Her pro-Venetian policies, they argue, were a matter of sound political strategy, not secret loyalty. She understood that a prosperous Venice was a valuable trading partner, and that peace in the Adriatic was preferable to costly wars. She was not a Venetian spy, she was an Ottoman queen who happened to be of Venetian birth, and she used that connection to her advantage, and to the empire's. And Urban has earned the lessons of her harem well. She maintains a low public profile, operating from the shadows, but her influence is everywhere. She has taken the torch from the Russian witch and is carrying it forward, not with fire and laughter, but with a cool, calculated Venetian grace. The age of the women is not over. It has just entered a new phase. With Selimai on the throne, Urban becomes the Hosekai Sultan, the undisputed first lady of the harem. But she knows that this title, while powerful, is temporary. It lasts only as long as her husband, the Sultan, is alive. The true apex of female power, the ultimate prize in the harem, is the position of Valide-Sultan, the Queen Mother. The title had always existed, but it was her EM's generation that began to transform it. Traditionally, the Sultan's mother was a respected figure, the head of the harem household, but her political influence was informal. Now, thanks to the groundwork laid over the past decades, it was about to become an official, institutionalized position of immense authority. The Valide-Sultan was not just the Sultan's mother, she was, in many ways, his co-regent, the female pillar of the dynasty. You can see the shift in the very architecture of the palace. The Valide-Sultan is given a magnificent suite of apartments that are strategically located. They are adjacent to her son's, the Sultan's, private quarters. This proximity is power. She has constant, informal access to the ruler, away from the prying eyes and ears of the vizier Paz has. The Golden Road, the corridor that concubines once traversed to visit the Sultan, now also serves as a private pathway between the ruler and his most trusted advisor, his mother. The Valide's power is threefold. First, she is absolute authority over the harem. She is its CEO. She manages its vast budget, which is a significant portion of the state's revenue. She oversees the education of the princes, decides on promotions and punishments for the hundreds of women and eunuchs, and arranges the politically important marriages of the princesses. The harem, a state within a state, is her personal fiefdom. Second, she has immense political influence. She is the one person the Sultan can, theoretically, trust completely. Her interests are aligned with his. The stability of his reign is the source of her power. So when she whispers advice in his ear about a new appointment for Grand Vizier, or her opinion on a proposed military campaign, he listens. She becomes the head of her own political faction, forging alliances with Paz and generals, placing her loyalists in key positions. And third, she has enormous economic power. The Valide-Sultan receives a huge stipend, often one of the largest in the empire. She controls vast swaths of land, and she invests. Like her harem, the powerful Valides continue the tradition of large-scale public works, building mosques, hospitals, and fountains. This is not just piety, it's a way of projecting power and winning the hearts of the populace. And here's a fascinating, little-known fact about the Valide's financial clout: she often acted as a bank. High-ranking state officials who were temporarily short on cash, perhaps to fund a military campaign or to pay their own troops, might come to the Valide-Sultan for a short-term, high-interest loan. This gave her incredible leverage over the most powerful men in the government. A Grand Vizier who owed the Queen Mother a huge sum of money was much more likely to listen to her suggestions on state policy. For Urban, this ultimate prize is tantalizingly close. As Hosekai to the unambiguous Selimai, she is already the de facto power behind the throne. She works in a quiet, effective partnership with the brilliant Grand Vizier, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha. While he runs the government, she manages the palace. They are the two anchors that keep the ship of state steady, but she is still just the Hosekai. Her moment comes in 1574. Selimai, after a reign of only 8 years, dies. The story of his death is slightly absurd. It's said that he slipped on the wet marble floor of a new bathhouse he had just built in the palace, fatally striking his head. His love of wine may have contributed to his unsteadiness. With Selim's death, Urbanu's son Murad II becomes Sultan, and Urbanu at last ascends to the position she has been preparing for her entire adult life. She becomes the first truly all-powerful Valide Sultan of the era known as the Sultanate of Women. Her first act as Valide is a masterclass in ruthless pragmatism. To ensure her son Murad's smooth accession, she needs to hide Selim's death until Murad can travel from his provincial post to the capital. Echoing the cunning of Sokol Mehmed Pasha at Suleiman's death, Urbanu has her husband's body packed in a box of ice and hidden in the palace, all while claiming the Sultan is merely indisposed. She then sends a secret message to her son. When Murad arrives, he is acclaimed as Sultan, and one of his first acts is the grim necessity of the time the execution of his 5 younger half-brothers. Urbanu has secured her son's throne and her own power over the dead bodies of her husband's other children. But was the Valide Sultan's power truly absolute, or was it a carefully constructed performance? This is a major point of contention for historians. The traditional narrative, often based on the shocked reports of foreign ambassadors, presents these women as the true rulers of the empire, manipulating their weak-willed sons. However, many revisionist historians argue this is an exaggeration. They claim that the power of the Valide was always conditional and depended heavily on the personality of her son. A strong-willed sultan could, and sometimes did, ignore his mother's advice. They also point out that the Valide's power was a symptom, not a cause, of a changing political system. As the sultans retreated more into the palace and delegated more authority, a power vacuum was created. Being in the right place at the right time and possessing the right skills simply stepped in to fill it. They were not usurpers, they were a necessary part of a new political equilibrium. Their rule wasn't a perversion of the system, it was the system, at least for a time. As Urbanu settles into her new grand apartments, you can feel the shift. The center of gravity in the palace has moved. While the Sultan sits on the throne, the real energy, the real decision-making, seems to emanate from the Queen Mother's wing. She has reached the top of the silk ladder. She is the Princess of Light, and her light now casts a shadow that covers the entire empire. As the new Valide Sultan, Urbanu doesn't just embrace her power, she refines it. She understands that direct confrontation is clumsy. The most effective rule is the one that is felt but not always seen. She becomes a master of governing from the shadows, and her favorite place to do it is from behind the curtains of her carriage. Murad her son, is an intelligent man, but, like his father, he is more interested in the arts and the pleasures of the harem than in the tedious details of administration. He respects his mother deeply and relies on her guidance, creating the perfect conditions for Urbanu to exercise her influence. She perfects a style of rule that is subtle, indirect, but absolutely decisive. You can picture the scene. A magnificent, covered carriage, intricately carved and gilded, rumbles through the streets of Istanbul. Inside, shielded from all public view by latticed screens and heavy silk curtains, sits Urbanu Sultan. This carriage is not just a vehicle, it's a mobile command center. As she travels from the top KAP palace to one of her other properties or to inspect the progress on one of her charitable foundations, she is not idle. Pos hasn't officials seeking her favor or her opinion might ride on horseback alongside her carriage, speaking to her through the screen. She listens, her face unseen, her voice a calm, measured presence from within the gilded box. She might give a subtle nod to a trusted eunuch, who then relays a decision. An entire policy could be debated, and during a short trip across the city. It's the ultimate power move. She is physically present in the public sphere, moving through the heart of the city, yet she remains completely within the protected, private sphere of the harem, adhering to all the rules of female seclusion. Her partnership with the Grand Vizier Sokol Mehmed Pasha, which had defined her husband's reign, continues. But now, she is the senior partner. They are the twin pillars of the state. However, their policy ideas begin to diverge, particularly concerning her homeland, Venice. In 1570, before Selim I's death, the Ottomans had launched a successful but costly war to conquer the island of Cyprus from the Venetians. The war was championed by the hawks in the divan. Urbanu, at the time was unable to stop it. Now as Valide, she pursues a staunchly pro-Venetian foreign policy. She believes that peace and trade with the Republic are far more beneficial to the empire than constant, draining wars. She uses her influence over Murad to overrule the more aggressive Pars has, ensuring that the peace treaty with Venice is maintained. Here's a curious detail that shows her personal touch in this grand strategy. She maintained a spy network in Venice. But her spies weren't just soldiers or diplomats. One of her key agents was her own personal Kiro, the Jewish businesswoman Esther Handley, who had extensive trade contacts throughout the Mediterranean. Through Handley, an Urban could get unfiltered economic and political intelligence from Venice, bypassing the official channels of the Divan, funded by her personal fortune, and it gave her a significant advantage in shaping foreign policy. This pro-Venetian stance led to one of the most significant debates among historians regarding an Urban. Was her policy a wise, pragmatic choice for the good of the Ottoman Empire, recognizing the economic benefits of peace over the glory of conquest? Or was it, as her detractors claimed, a betrayal driven by a secret, sentimental loyalty to her Venetian origins? The Venetian ambassadors certainly fueled the latter narrative, boasting in their reports back home that the Valide Sultan was their greatest ally, Sultan, a woman of her word, a true friend to the Republic. Most modern historians lean towards the pragmatic view. They argue that Urban was a shrewd politician who correctly assessed that the era of easy Ottoman expansion was ending. The empire's resources were better spent on internal development and trade than on costly overseas adventures. Her Venetian background simply gave her a unique insight into the situation. She wasn't a Venetian patriot, she was an Ottoman realist. Perfectly encapsulates the ambiguity of her position. Was she the ultimate insider or the ultimate outsider? Her influence is not just political, it's cultural. She commissions the magnificent Etik Validim Os complex, designed by the master architect Mimar Sinan. It's one of the largest and most impressive imperial mosque complexes in Istanbul, a sprawling testament to her power and piety, rivaling the works of any male sultan. It solidifies her public image as a great builder and a devout Muslim, countering any whispers about her foreign origins or her unnatural political power. In the harem, her word is absolute. She presides over a court that is growing ever larger and more complex. Her son, Murad I, is famous for his voracious appetite for new concubines, and he is said to have fathered over 100 children. The harem swells with women and princes, making it an even more intricate and dangerous political landscape. An Urban is the one who manages this sprawling, chaotic family, keeping the rivalries in check and maintaining a semblance of order. She has perfected the art of invisible governance. The empire runs smoothly. The Grand Vizier handles the daily paperwork. The Sultan enjoys his life, and an Urban, from her apartments or her gilded carriage, gently guides the ship of state. The Princess of Light has shown that the brightest light isn't always the one that dazzles, but the one that illuminates the path from the shadows. In Urban Sultan's reign as Valadim arcs a high point of stability, but as she ages, a new power begins to rise within the harem. The dynamic is a familiar one. The Sultan Murad I has a favorite, a new Hosek, and this time, it's a woman who seems to be a strange and compelling mix of hurry, endless ambition and an Urbanus cool calculation. Her name is Sophia. Her origins, like those of her predecessors, are shrouded in mystery and competing legends. The most widely accepted story is that she was of Albanian descent, born in the Dukaji Highlands. Another, more romantic tale promoted by the Venetians, claims she was a Biafo, just like an Urban, and was even her kinswoman, captured by corsairs on the same fateful voyage. This was likely a piece of Venetian propaganda to claim a connection to the new rising star. Exceptionally intelligent, and she captivated Murad long before he became sultan. She enters the harem as a young girl and is presented to Murad when he is still a prince. Her name, Sophia, means the pure one. She becomes his sole favorite, and for many years, he is completely monogamous, a rarity for an Ottoman prince. She bears him a son, Mehmed, securing her position. Their relationship is one of deep affection and intellectual partnership. When Murad ascends the throne and Urbanyu becomes the powerful Validi Sultan, a tense political triangle forms. There's the Sultan, his powerful mother, and his ambitious wife. Urbanyu, remembering her own rise to power, is wary of Sophia. She sees a younger version of herself and knows that a clever Hosekai is a potential rival. Urbanyu reportedly advises her and to take other concubines to dilute Sophia's influence and to ensure the dynasty has more than one male heir, as Sophia's other children had not survived infancy. For a long time, Murad refuses, remaining loyal to Sophia. But eventually, under pressure from his mother and the court, he relents. The floodgates open. Murad's harem expands exponentially, filled with beautiful women from every corner of the empire and beyond. But this tactic to sideline Sophia backfires. Instead of being lost in a sea of rivals, she remains the undisputed first lady, the Hosekai Sultan. She is the mother of the eldest son and the Sultan's most trusted confidant. The other women are fleeting distractions, she is a permanent fixture. Sophia is a formidable politician in her own right. She learns from Urbanus' methods, operating quietly, building alliances, and managing her own network of informants. But she has a flair, a certain panache, that her mother-in-law lacks. She is known for her exquisite taste, her lavish spending, and for a rather famous and unusual petty cat. This wasn't just any cat. According to reports from European ambassadors, Sophia had a beloved cat that was always with her, adorned with a tiny jeweled collar. In a court filled with intriguing and trustworthy people, a pet can be a source of uncomplicated affection. But it also served a subtle purpose. The image of the powerful Hosekai stroking her bejeweled cat while making political unruffled power, while others were scrambling and shouting. She was serene in control with her feline companion. It's a small, quirky detail, but it adds a layer of personality and calculated image-making to her character. The rivalry between Urbanyu and Sophia is a classic harem power struggle. It's the old guard versus the new generation. Urbanyu, the Validi, holds the formal power. Sophia, the Hosekai, holds the Sultan's heart. They clash over appointments, over policy, and over the management of the royal household. It's a cold war fought with whispers, strategic gift-giving, and subtle manipulations of the Sultan. When Urbanyu Sultan dies in 1583, the reins of power pass seamlessly into Sophia's hands. She has been the apprentice for years now, she is the master. As the undisputed favorite of the Sultan and the mother of the heir apparent, Mehmed, she becomes the de facto queen of the empire. She doesn't have the official title of Validi yet, but she wields the power of one. But was Sophia just another power-hungry harem woman, or was there more to her? The historical judgment is, as always, divided. Her critics, particularly some Ottoman chroniclers, accuse her of being greedy and corrupt. They claim she sold government offices to the highest bidder through her network of intermediaries, enriching herself and her faction. They blame her for the escalating corruption and nepotism that began to plague the Ottoman administration. She represents the negative culmination of female influence, where personal gain trumped the good of the state. However, other historians offer a more charitable interpretation. They argue that Sophia was simply playing the game by the rules that were now established. The buying and selling of offices was becoming common practice throughout the government, not just within her faction. They also point to her astute foreign policy, where she continued Urbanyu's pragmatic approach, maintaining peace where possible and acting as a stabilizing force. They see her not as the cause of the system's problems, but as a product of them, a brilliant woman who managed to thrive in an increasingly transnational and corrupt political world. With Urbanyu gone, Sophia's influence over Murad is absolute. She is involved in every aspect of governance, her opinion sought on everything from military appointments to architectural projects. The Albanian girl named Sophia has outlasted and outmaneuvered her powerful Venetian mother-in-law. She and her cat are now at the very center of the imperial web. The era of Urbanyu is over. The era of Sophia has truly begun. Sophia's power is immense, but like the women before her, she is still confined by the physical and social walls of the harem. She cannot simply walk into the Grand Bazaar to negotiate a business deal or meet with a foreign ambassador in person. To project her power into the outside world, she needs a bridge. She needs a special kind of agent who can move between the cloistered, female world of the harem and the male-dominated world of commerce and politics. She needs a Kira. The Kira, a role that becomes increasingly prominent during the Sultanate of Women, is one of the most fascinating and unique positions in the Ottoman court. The word itself means lady or mistress in Greek. The Kiras were almost exclusively Jewish women, and there was a very practical reason for this. Religious laws at the time placed restrictions on interactions between Muslim women and non-related men, as well as between Muslim women and non-Muslims. Christian women were also subject to their own set of social restrictions. Jewish women, however, occupied a unique social space. They were not bound by the same seclusion rules as Muslim women, and as merchants and traders, they were accustomed to dealing with men in the public sphere. They could enter the harem, a place forbidden to almost all men, and they could also move freely in the city's markets. They were the perfect intermediaries. The Kira's official job is mundane. She is a high-end personal shopper and purveyor of luxury goods to the women of the harem. She brings them the finest silks from Persia, jewels from India, perfumes from Arabia, and cosmetics and medicines from Europe. You would see her arriving at the harem, accompanied by servants carrying chests and bundles, ready to display her wares to the Sultan's mother, his wives, and his daughters. But this official role is just a cover for her real function. The Kera is the harem's window to the world, and more specifically, she is the Vanity Sultan's personal chief of staff, financial advisor, and secret agent. Takes Orpheus' famous Kira, Esperanza Malkai. She is more than just a merchant, she is Sophia's confidant and business partner. Through Malkai, Sophia manages her vast personal fortune. She invests in real estate, funds trade ventures, and manages the revenue from her lands. Malkai is her broker, her banker, and her eyes and ears in the financial heart of the empire. When Sophia wants to discreetly buy a seaside villa or invest in a shipment of spices from the east, it is Malkai who makes it happen. The Kira's role also extends deep into the world of politics and patronage. Here's how it would work: an ambitious pasha wants a promotion to a more powerful and lucrative post, say, the governorship of Egypt. He knows that the Sultan's decision will be heavily influenced by his mother, Sophia, but he can't approach her directly, so he approaches her Carol. He meets with Esperanza Malkai and makes his case, likely accompanied by a very large gift. Malkai then presents this petition to Sophia. If Sophia agrees, she will whisper the Pasha's name in her son's ear at the opportune moment. When the Pasha gets his promotion, he owes his career to Sophia, and he sends another, even larger gift of gratitude, which is, of course, handled by Malkai. A portion of this transaction goes to the Kira as her commission. It's a system of patronage that, to modern eyes, looks a lot like institutionalized corruption. And this brings us to a slightly bizarre and quirky aspect of the Kira's power. She was often one of the most hated people in Istanbul. While she was protected by the immense power of her patroness inside the palace, on the outside, she was seen by many as the face of the harem's illegitimate influence and greed. The soldiers of the Janissary Corps in particular, who saw their own pay diminished by what they perceived as palace corruption, often directed their anger at the Kira. Esperanza Malkai, for all her wealth and influence, lived a dangerous life. Was the Kira system a brilliant adaptation that allowed powerful women to exercise their economic and political rights within a restricted society? Or was it a fundamentally corrupting influence on the state? This is a topic historians love to dissect. One perspective argues that the Kiras were empowering figures. They were successful, independent businesswomen who achieved immense status and wealth in a patriarchal world. They provided an essential service, enabling the imperial women to manage their property and engage in the public sphere in a way that was culturally acceptable. The Kira was a testament to female ingenuity and cross-cultural cooperation. The opposing view, however, is that the Kiras were enablers of the court's worst excesses. They were the chief agents of a system where political offices were sold to the highest bidder, undermining meritocracy and filling the administration with incompetent or corrupt officials. In this narrative, the Kira is not a feminist icon but a symbol of the decay and graft that was beginning to weaken the empire from within. You see the Kira's influence everywhere. You might see a new shipment of exquisite Venetian glass arriving for Sapphire, and you know the Kira arranged it. You overhear the junior officials gossiping about how a certain Pasha secured his new post, and they'll lower their voices and mutter the Kira's name. She is an invisible presence that permeates everything. The Kira is the ultimate backstage operator, the secret key that unlocks the golden cage of the harem and allows its power to flow into the world. She is the living embodiment of the complex, often contradictory, nature of the Sultanate of women, a story of empowerment and corruption, of brilliant maneuvering and systemic decay, all embodied in the figure of a shrewd businesswoman, with a trunk full of silks and a head full of secrets. Sophia's influence isn't just confined to the internal politics of the Ottoman Empire like her realm before her. She steps onto the global stage. But her diplomatic dance partner is a particularly interesting one, the formidable Queen or Elizabeth I of England. This correspondence between the two most powerful women of the Protestant and Sunni Islamic worlds is a fascinating footnote in history, a story of shared power, mutual respect, and some truly magnificent gift. The connection is initially forged out of pure pragmatism. England, facing the constant threat of Catholic Spain, is looking for allies. The Ottoman Empire, a fellow rival of the Spanish Habsburgs, is a natural, if unusual, choice. An alliance between the English Queen and the Turkish Sultan makes perfect strategic sense. But the English ambassadors in Istanbul quickly realize what the Venetians and the Poles had learned decades earlier: to get to the Sultan, you have to go through the women. And so Queen Elizabeth begins to write to Sapphire. The letters are a masterclass in diplomacy, addressing Sapphire not as a secluded consort, but as a fellow ruler. Elizabeth addresses her as Most Serene and Imperial Princess Sapphire, Queen of the Turks, bestowing upon her a title that acknowledges her immense power. She refers to their shared status as female rulers in a world of men, creating a bond of solidarity. You can imagine Sapphire receiving one of these letters, delivered by the English ambassador. It would have been translated by the court dragomaness, its polite and flattering words read aloud to her in her opulent chambers. For Sapphire, who is technically still just the Hosekoi and not yet the Validé, this international recognition is a powerful tool. It reinforces her status within the Ottoman court. If the great Queen of England sees her as a fellow monarch, who in the divan can dare to question her influence? The two women exchange not just letters, but lavish gifts. This is where the story gets really fun. Gift-giving in this era was not just a pleasantry, it was a form of political communication, with each object carrying a symbolic meaning. Elizabeth, knowing the Ottomans' love for novelty and mechanical wonders, sends Sapphire an elaborate, jewel-encrusted clockwork organ. It was a technological marvel for its time, playing music automatically. It was a statement of English ingenuity and wealth. Sapphire, in return, sends Elizabeth a truly spectacular collection of gifts. Her present includes a magnificent robe of cloth of gold, a bejeweled belt, to silver-wrought handkerchiefs, and a ruby and pearl tiara. It's a showcase of Ottoman luxury and craftsmanship. In a very real sense, the two queens were engaging in a cross-cultural fashion show, each trying to impress and communicate their status through the objects they exchanged. But the most famous and slightly bizarre gift exchange involves a carriage. Elizabeth, proud of English coach-making, sends Sapphire a magnificent, custom-built carriage. It's a grand gesture. However, there's a problem. Ottoman women of Sophie status did not typically ride in open-windowed European-style coaches. They travelled in the covered, curtained carriages we've already seen. The English carriage, with its large windows designed to see and be seen, is a cultural misstep. It's a bit like giving a bikini to a nun. According to the English ambassador's own slightly embarrassed report, Sapphire admired the carriage, but found it strange and unusable for a lady of her standing. This little anecdote is a perfect illustration of the cultural gap the two queens were trying to bridge. They saw each other as peers, yet their understanding of each other's worlds was filtered through their own customs and traditions. What do historians make of this strange pen-pal relationship? Is it a quaint historical curiosity or something more significant? The traditional interpretation often downplays it, seeing it as a minor sideshow to the real diplomacy being conducted by male ambassadors and viceroys. The letters are seen as mere flattery, the gifts as trinkets. However, a more recent school of thought takes this female-led diplomacy much more seriously. Historians, particularly those focused on gender and cross-cultural studies, argue that this correspondence was a crucial back channel that helped cement the Anglo-Ottoman alliance. Sophia's influence was essential in securing favorable trade agreements for English merchants, known as the capitulations. She personally championed the English cause at court, often against the pro-French or pro-Venetian faction. They argue that Elizabeth and Sophia were creating a new, feminized language of diplomacy. By emphasizing their shared gender, their roles as mothers, Elizabeth as mother to her people, Sophia as mother to the future Sultan, and their exchange of personal, luxurious gifts, they were building a relationship that was more personal and perhaps more resilient than a formal treaty. The debate continues, but it's clear that something more than just politeness was at play. Back in the palace, the arrival of a letter or a gift from England is a major event. It elevates Sophia's prestige immensely. It shows everyone that her power is recognized not just within the walls of the palace, but by the great monarchs of the world. The girl from the Albanian highlands is now corresponding with the Virgin Queen of England, to women at the pinnacle of their respective worlds, weaving a delicate web of diplomacy with ink, silk, and jewels. Sophia's long powerful reign as Hoseki seems unshakable. Her son, Mehmed, is the undisputed heir, and her influence over the aging Sultan Murad I is absolute. But time is the one enemy no ruler can defeat. In 1595, Murad dies, and Sophia's son becomes Sultan Mehmed II. At long last, Sophia ascends to the title she has coveted for decades. She is now the Valide Sultan, the official Queen Mother, the most powerful woman in the empire. Her first act as Valide is to oversee one of the most grim and shocking events in the dynasty's history. Her son, Mehmed II, immediately orders the execution of his 19 younger brothers and half-brothers. 19 princes, some of them still infants, are strangled with silk cords to secure his throne. It is the largest single instance of legal fratricide in Ottoman history, and it sends a wave of horror throughout the empire and across Europe. Sophia, as the new Valide, presides over this. It is the brutal, bloody price of her ultimate triumph. With her son on the throne and all potential rivals eliminated, Sophia's power reaches its absolute zenith. She is the true ruler of the empire in all but name. Mehmed I is a weakened, indecisive ruler, happy to leave the affairs of state in the capable hands of his mother. She controls appointments, dictates foreign policy, and manages the imperial treasury. Her stipend as Valide Sultan is an astronomical sum, and her personal wealth is legendary. But as Sophia settles into her role as the Grand Matriarch, a new story is beginning on the lowest rungs of the harem ladder. A young Greek girl is brought to the palace. Her name is Anastasia, and she was born on the island of Tinos, the daughter of a Greek Orthodox priest. Captured in a raid, she is sold into the top KAP harem. She is about 13 or 14 years old, beautiful, and possessing a quiet intelligence that sets her apart. She is given a new name, Mapi Dyker, meaning moon-faced. Later, she will be given another name, the one by which history will remember her. It means leader of the flock, a strangely prophetic name for a young slave girl. Qasem arrives in a harem that is completely dominated by Sophia Sultan. Sophia is the sun, and everyone else orbits around her. Qasem is just another piece of human property, another trainee, another Karaye. She goes through the same rigorous education as all the girls before her, learning Turkish, Islam, court etiquette, music, and dance. But she is a keen observer. She sees how Sophia wields power. She sees the network of patronage, the importance of the kira, the way a well-timed whisper can be more effective than a direct command. She is studying the master, learning the craft of power from the very bottom. Her chance comes when she catches the eye not of the reigning sultan, Mehmed I, but of his young grandson, Ahmed. Ahmad is a prince, but he is far down the line of succession and is living in the palace under the watchful, and likely threatening, eye of his father and his grandmother, Sophia. Ahmed becomes Sultan in 1603 in a rather unexpected way. His father, Mehmed I dies. Ahmed is only 13 years old. For the first time, a minor is on the Ottoman throne. And this creates a huge problem. According to the law of fratricide, Ahmed should have executed his own younger brother Mustafa. But he doesn't. This decision is a turning point in Ottoman history, and historians still debate why it happened. One theory is that Ahmed was fond of his brother and simply couldn't bring himself to do it. Another, more practical reason is that Ahmed had not yet fathered any children. If he were to die, executing his brother would mean the end of the entire Ottoman dynasty. So for the first time, the law of fratricide is said to live in the kafes, the gilded cage. Those luxurious apartments where princes were kept in isolation. The age of routine fratricide is over, and the age of the kafes has truly begun. This is the world that the young Qasim enters. She becomes the favorite of the young, inexperienced Sultan Ahmed I. He is deeply in love with her. She is not his only consort, but she quickly becomes his most trusted one, his Hosek I. Like harem, she bears him numerous children, including several sons, Murad and Ibrahim, and daughters, Aiz and Fatma. She solidifies her position through motherhood. Qasim is different from Sophia. Sophia's power was based on her relationship with a powerful, adult sultan whom she eventually came to dominate. Qasim's power is, from the beginning, based on her relationship with a young, impressionable boy sultan who relies on her. She is not just his lover, she is his partner, his advisor, and in some ways a maternal figure. She is also known for her intelligence and political acumen, but unlike the often stern Sophia, Qasim cultivates a public image of piety and immense charity. She uses her growing wealth to fund an endless stream of charitable works, freeing slaves, helping indebted families, and providing dowries for the daughters of the poor. She understands, perhaps even better than her rem, that popular support is a formidable shield. While the magnificent Sophia, now the old Validi, is still a powerful force as the grandmother of the Sultan, her influence begins to wane. She is eventually retired to the old palace, the traditional home for the harems of deceased sultans. The Greek priest's daughter, Anastasia, has learned her lessons well. She has navigated the treacherous waters of Sophie's harem and has captured the heart of a sultan. She is building her own network, her own fortune, and her own public persona. The era of Sophia is slowly fading. The era of Qasim is about to dawn, and it will be the most dramatic and powerful chapter in the entire history of the Sultanate of Women. Qasim's time as Hosek I to Sultan Ahmed I is a period of quiet consolidation. She amasses wealth, builds her charitable reputation, and most importantly, secures the future by bearing numerous children. But her true ascent to power begins with a tragedy. In 1617, Ahmed I, still only in his late 20s, dies of typhus. His death throws the empire into a succession crisis unlike any it has ever seen. Qasim is now a widow. Her sons, Murad and Ibrahim, are still young children. According to the new precedent of seniority, the throne should pass to Ahmed's surviving brother, the one who had been spared and kept in the kafes, Prince Mustafa, and this is exactly what happens. Mustafa I is brought out of the kafes after 14 years of isolation. He is, to put it mildly, unfit to rule. His long confinement has left him deeply disturbed, paranoid, and mentally unstable. The court officials who placed him on the throne, perhaps hoping to control him, quickly realize their mistake. He is seen wandering the palace, talking to birds, and flinging coins to the fish in the fountains. He is incapable of governing. After just a few months in a palace coup, Mustafa is declared incompetent and sent back to the kafes. The throne is now handed to Ahmed's eldest son by another consort, a boy named Osman. This is a disaster for Qasim. She is not the mother of the new sultan. She is sidelined. As the mother of potential rivals to Osman, her position is precarious. She is sent to the old palace, the traditional place of exile for the mothers of non-reigning princes. For a moment it seems her story might be over. She has lost her husband and now she has lost her position at court. But Qasem is a survivor. From the old palace, she continues to maintain her network of allies within the court, biding her time. And she doesn't have to wait long. The new Sultan, Osman II, is a young, idealistic, but reckless reformer. He sees the corruption in the state, particularly within the elite Janissary corps, and decides to take them on. He plans to create a new, loyal army and dissolve the Janissaries. This is a fatal miscalculation. The Janissaries, feeling their power and privilege threatened, rise in revolt in 1622. They storm the palace, capture the young Sultan, and, in a humiliating and brutal display, execute him. The rebels then march to the Cafes and, for a second time, drag out the mentally unstable Mustafa and place him back on the throne. The empire is in chaos, but this second reign of Mustafa the Mad is no more successful than the first. It becomes clear to everyone the pause has, the ulama, the religious scholars, and the army that this cannot continue. The state needs a strong, legitimate ruler, and this is Qasim's moment. From the old palace, her faction springs into action. They argue that the only solution is to depose Mustafa once and for all and place Qasim's eldest surviving son, Murad, on the throne. Murad is only 11 years old, but he is seen as the best hope for stability. After intense negotiations and political maneuvering, all parties agree. Mustafa is gently but firmly removed from power for the last time and sent back to the Cafes, where he will remain until his death. And in 1623, the young Murad IV is acclaimed as Sultan. Because he is a minor, he cannot rule on his own. A regent is needed. And there is only one logical choice: his intelligent, experienced, and politically savvy mother. Qasim Sultan returns from the old palace not just as the Baladi Sultan, but as the official regent by Sultan out of the Ottoman Empire. This is the absolute pinnacle of female power, a position no woman before her had ever formally held. Harem had been a powerful wife, Enurb and and Safiya had been powerful mothers who ruled from behind the throne. Qasim now steps out from behind the curtain. She is the official, legally recognized ruler of the empire until her son comes of age. She doesn't sit in the divan meetings herself, of course. That would be too great a breach of tradition. But she governs from behind a curtained window that overlooks the council chamber. The great Pawes and viziers of the empire would conduct their debates and present their reports, all while knowing that the true ruler was listening to their every word from behind a screen. Sometimes she would communicate through her chief black eunuch, who would act as her intermediary. She would speak directly from behind the curtain, her voice a disembodied, absolute authority. Here is a small, telling detail of her new power. She moves her personal quarters from the harem into the Sultan's own wing of the palace, right next to her sons. She is breaking down the physical separation between the harem and the center of government. Her presence is everywhere. But was her regency a success? This is a point of vigorous debate among historians. One view is that she was a stabilizing force during a period of incredible turmoil. She held the empire together when it could have easily fractured. She managed the rebellious Janissaries, put down revolts in the provinces, and kept the machinery of government running. She was a shrewd and capable administrator who saved the dynasty from collapse. The other, more critical, perspective argues that her regency was a period of intense political instability and corruption. To maintain her power, she relied on a constantly shifting series of alliances with various Pawes and factions, leading to a high turnover of Grand Viziers and a lack of consistent policy. They claim her rule was marked by intrigue and that she used the state treasury to enrich her supporters and herself, further entrenching the system of patronage and graft. The truth is likely a combination of both. She was governing in an almost impossible situation, and she used the tools available to her: patronage, intrigue, and ruthless political maneuvering to survive and to keep the empire afloat. The Greek priest's daughter has come a long way. She has outlived her husband, outmaneuvered her rivals, survived exile, and capitalized on a series of crises to achieve a level of power her predecessors could only have dreamed of. She is Qasim Sultan, the valid the regent, the woman behind the curtain. ruling one of the world's greatest empires. As the official regent, Qasem isn't just a political power, she is a financial institution. The wealth she had been accumulating for years as Hosek I now combines with the immense stipend and resources of the Valide Sultan and regent. She becomes, without exaggeration, one of the wealthiest individuals in the entire empire, and she wields this fortune as a primary instrument of power. Her personal treasury is said to be legendary. It's not just gold and jewels, but vast land holdings, commercial properties, and interests in trade ventures from Cairo to Crimea. She is a tycoon in a veil, managing a portfolio that would be the envy of any modern hedge fund manager. This wealth gives her a degree of independence that is staggering. While the state treasury is often depleted by costly wars and the demands of the Janissaries, Qasem's personal coffers are always full, and she uses this money with surgical precision. One of her most effective strategies is to control the military, not through command, but through debt. The Janissary Corps, the elite infantry of the empire, are a constant threat. They are powerful, prone to rebellion, and their loyalty is always for sale. Qasem understands this perfectly. When the state is slow to pay the Janissaries their salaries, which happens frequently, unrest begins to brew. The soldiers grumble, they protest, and sometimes they riot. This is where Qasem steps in. From her personal funds, she advances the money to the Janissary commanders to pay their troops. It's a brilliant move. She instantly becomes the hero who solved the crisis, earning the gratitude of the common soldiers. More importantly, she makes the Janissary leadership indebted to her, both financially and politically. An Aga commander of the Janissaries who owes his position and the loyalty of his men to the Valide Sultan's generosity is far less likely to support a coup against her. She effectively privatizes the loyalty of the army. This leads to a fascinating and slightly strange spectacle. During ceremonial parades, the Janissaries would march past the palace, and when they passed the section of the harem where Qasem's apartments were, they would stop, turn, and cheer for their Valide, their mother and patroness. It was a public display of their allegiance, a clear signal to any would-be rivals that the army belonged to her. Her wealth also functions as a state bailout fund. When the empire faces an unexpected crisis, say famine in a province, the need to quickly fund a naval expedition, or to pay a sudden indemnity to a foreign power and the state treasury is empty, it is often Qasem who provides the funds. She essentially offers the empire a line of credit. The documents recording these transactions are remarkable. They show loans from the Valide Sultan's treasury to the imperial treasury to be paid back with interest. One of the most famous examples is her funding of the navy. When the fleet needs to be refitted and supplied for a campaign, and the admirals complain of a lack of funds, Qasem simply pays for it. She buys the timber, the hemp for the ropes, the gunpowder, and the biscuits for the sailors. This, of course, gives her immense influence over the navy and its commanders. But was this practice of a private individual funding the state a sign of strength or of terminal decline? This is a core debate for historians studying this period. The positive interpretation is that Qasem's wealth was a source of stability. She was a patriot, using her personal fortune to shore up the state in times of crisis. She was the empire's ultimate safety net. Her financial interventions prevented collapses, kept the army loyal, and allowed the government to function when it would have otherwise ground to a halt. In this view, she is the ultimate benefactor, the mother who provides for her family, the empire, when it is in need. The more critical view argues that this system was a disaster in the long run. By making the state dependent on her personal wealth, she undermined the formal institutions of government. The treasury, the divan, the vizieress, they all became secondary to her personal power. It created a system where political and military loyalty was not to the state or the sultan, but to a single individual. Furthermore, they argue that her wealth was often acquired through the very corruption, the selling of offices, the acceptance of massive gifts that was draining the state treasury in the first place. She was, in a sense, solving a problem that she herself was helping to create. It was a vicious cycle of private enrichment and public dependency. You can feel this immense financial power in the air. The Kira is a constant presence, managing the endless flow of money. Officials and petitioners don't just come seeking political favor, they come seeking loans, grants, and investments. The harem has become the empire's unofficial Ministry of Finance and its central bank, and Sultan is the chairman, CEO, and chief shareholder, all rolled into one. She has monetized power itself, turning the abstract concept of influence into a tangible, countable, and utterly dominant fortune. As you delve deeper into this world, you realize the harem is not just a residence, it's a government in miniature. It has its own laws, its own budget, its own foreign policy, and a complex, rigid bureaucracy that mirrors the larger administration of the empire. The Sultanate of Women didn't just happen because of a few ambitious individuals. It was made possible by this highly organized, self-contained universe that had been evolving for centuries. At the top, you have the Valide Sultan, the Queen and CEO. Below her, the Hosek-I Sultan, the favorite, who is like a powerful vice president, but the day-to-day operations are run by a whole cadre of skilled female administrators. The most important of these is the Hoseind Arasta, the High Treasurer of the harem. She is the CFO. She manages the harem's enormous budget, oversees all income and expenditures, and keeps meticulous record. She is responsible for everything from purchasing tons of rice for the kitchens to procuring the priceless jewels for a princess's wedding. She is a figure of immense trust and authority, often one of the most senior and respected K-alphas. Then there's the Cat Coup de Kadn, the Mistress Stewardess. Think of her as the chief operating officer. She is responsible for the internal management of the palace household, overseeing the staff, the protocol, and the daily running of the city within a city. She ensures that every ritual, from the Sultan's morning coffee to the evening prayers, is executed with flawless precision. The harem even has its own human resources department. The training of the new girls, the Karye, is a highly structured process overseen by experienced K-alphas. They are not just taught to be beautiful and entertaining. They are given a formal education. They learn to read and write Ottoman Turkish, to recite the Quran, and to master the intricate rules of courtly life. Many also become highly skilled in specific arts, calligraphy, poetry, music, or embroidery. The harem is a finishing school of the highest order, designed to produce women who are not just companions, but cultured and intelligent members of the court. And here's a curious detail that reveals the harem's surprising level of organization. It had its own medical ward, staffed by female physicians and surgeons. While the grand public hospitals built by women like harem served the city, the harem had its own dedicated healthcare system. This was not just about providing basic care, it was also about security. The health of the Sultan's consorts and children was a matter of state security, too important to be left to outside doctors who could be compromised or could spread secrets. The births of princes were attended by a team of midwives sworn to secrecy. The harem is also a hub of artistic and cultural production. Many of the women are talented poets, musicians, and artists. They compose music that is played for the Sultan, write poetry that is collected in anthologies, and create breathtakingly beautiful embroidery that is prized throughout the empire. It's a world that is at once a prison and a conservatory, a place of confinement and a place of intense creative energy. But was this highly structured institution a force for good or ill in the empire? The debate among historians is, as always, complex. The traditionalist viewpoint, popular for centuries, sees the harem's political evolution as a source of decline. This school of thought argues that the harem was supposed to be a private, domestic space for raising heirs. When women like harem, urban Yusufaya, and Qasem turned it into a political command center, they upset the natural order of things. This petticoat rule, they claim, led to weak sultans, rampant corruption, and a focus on palace intrigue rather than on sound governance. In this view was a cancer that grew within the heart of the empire and slowly weakened it from the inside. However, a more modern, revisionist perspective offers a compelling counter-argument. These historians, often with a focus on gender studies and institutional history, see the harem not as a cause of decline, but as an incredibly resilient and adaptive political institution. They argue that as the nature of the Sultan's rule changed from a warrior king on the frontier to a secluded palace monarch, The harem simply adapted. It evolved to fill the power vacuum, providing a new structure for governance when the old one was becoming obsolete. In this view, the harem was a unique Ottoman solution to the problem of political succession and administration. It produced educated, politically invested in the stability of the dynasty. It created a system of female patronage that, while looking like corruption to outsiders, was also a way of redistributing wealth and building political coalitions. They argue that labeling this period as one of decline is a value judgment based on a bias for a male-dominated, military-focused style of rule. The harem's political rise wasn't a perversion of the system, it was the system adapting to new realities. You see this intricate machinery all around you. You see the scribes meticulously logging every purchase. You see the K-alphas drilling the new girls on points of etiquette. You see the stewardesses planning the logistics for a major religious festival. It's a world of immense discipline, order, and purpose. It's a palace built for a king. But it's run like a convent, a corporation, and a government ministry all at once. And it's this powerful, efficient, and self-contained structure that allows a handful of brilliant women to take the reins of an entire empire. Life inside the harem is a symphony of unspoken rules, where the loudest messages are often delivered in complete silence. As you become more accustomed to the rhythms of the palace, you start to learn this secret language, a vocabulary of gestures, objects, and rituals where a simple cup of coffee can be a declaration of war or a promise of alliance. Take, for example, the ceremony of serving coffee to the Sultan. It's a theatrical production. The coffee is prepared in a separate, dedicated kitchen by a specialized coffee maker, the Kolviyista. It is served in tiny, handle-less porcelain cups, which are placed in exquisite, jewel-encrusted holders called ziyafs. A procession of high-ranking K-alphas brings the coffee in, their every movement graceful and precise. But the real politics lies in the details. Who is chosen to present the coffee? What is the coffee served sweet, signifying favor, or bitter, signifying displeasure? An ambitious consort who is chosen to serve the Sultan his coffee knows this is a sign of her rising stock. A visiting Pasha who is served coffee in a simple cup, while his rival receives one in a diamond-studded holder, knows exactly where he stands. The entire court watches these tiny dramas, decoding their meaning. Gifts are another critical part of this silent language. A gift is never just a gift, it's a message. When the Valide Sultan sends a bolt of expensive silk to a junior consort, it can be a sign of favor, a reward for loyalty. But it can also be a subtle warning, a reminder of who controls the resources and who is the giver of all good things. When a pasha sends a lavish gift to the harem, he is not just showing respect, he is making a political investment, a down payment on future favor. The giving of handkerchiefs is a particularly potent symbol. A handkerchief embroidered with a specific flower, or in a specific color, could be a coded message. For the Sultan to drop a handkerchief in front of a concubine was, according to popular lore, the signal that she had been chosen to spend the night with him. While this is likely a romanticized embellishment, the symbolic power of the handkerchief was very real. Even the food served at banquets is a political text. Certain dishes are associated with celebrations, others with mourning. The order in which guests are served, the quality of the dishes they receive, all that communicates a precise hierarchy of importance. To be served first after the imperial family is a great honor, to be served last is a public snub. Here's a quirky and fascinating example of this silent language in action: the use of slippers. According to some accounts, if the Sultan was visiting one of his consorts in her chambers and another consort happened to walk by, the sight of his imperial slippers outside the door was a clear and silent signal to go away and not to disturb him. The slippers themselves became a do not disturb sign, a quiet assertion of territory and favor in the fiercely competitive world of the harem. But does this elaborate system of symbolic communication represent a sophisticated and nuanced political culture? Or is it a sign of a society so restrictive that it forces people into these indirect, almost childish, forms of expression? Historians, naturally, have different takes. One perspective sees this as a highly refined and complex courtly culture, similar to the court of Louis XVI at Versailles. In this view, The ability to read and manipulate these subtle cues was a sign of intelligence and political skill. It was a high-context society where meaning was embedded in symbols and rituals, and mastering this language was essential for survival and success. It was a way of maintaining harmony and order by avoiding direct and potentially disruptive confrontation. Another, more critical, perspective argues that this reliance on silent, symbolic communication is a symptom of a deeply oppressive and paranoid environment. When people are afraid to speak their minds openly, they resort to whispers, gestures, and codes. In this view, the harem's silent language is not a sign of sophistication, but of fear. It's the language of prisoners, of people who are constantly watching each other, where a misplaced word or a misinterpreted gesture could have deadly consequences. They argue that a political system that relies on the sweetness of coffee to communicate policy is fundamentally unstable and dysfunctional. You see this language in play every day. You watch as a senior K Alpha subtly turns her back on a junior one who has fallen out of favor. You see a consort's face light up when she is given a slightly better quality of fabric for her new dress. You notice that when a certain controversial pasha's name is mentioned, the Validi Sultan takes a slow, deliberate sip of her sherbet, a sign to everyone present that the topic is closed. It's a world of immense subtlety, a constant, silent ballet of power. And you learn to dance it. You learn to watch, to listen to the silence, and to understand that in this gilded cage, the most important things are the ones that are never said out loud. You've walked the corridors of power, seen the rise and fall of brilliant women, and deciphered the silent language of the harem. You've witnessed her EMS fiery revolution, then Urbanus cool consolidation, Sophie's grand diplomacy, and Kossi MS absolute regency. It's an undeniable story of immense female power. But now, it's time to pull back and ask the big, challenging question: were they truly in charge? This is the fundamental debate that hangs over the entire sultanate of women. Were these women the true masters of the empire, feminist icons avant Loletta who seized control of a patriarchal system? Or were they, for all their influence and wealth, still prisoners of that same system, their power ultimately an illusion, or at best conditional? Let's look at the case for them being the masters. The evidence is compelling. Harem changed the very structure of the imperial family, moving the harem into the political center of the palace. Urban and Sophia corresponded with European monarchs as equals and dictated foreign policy. Kosem became the official, legal regent of the empire, ruling openly. They controlled immense fortunes, commanded the loyalty of armies and viziers, and built architectural monuments that still define the Istanbul skyline. They were not just influencing decisions, they were making them. Proponents of this view argue that these women were brilliant political actors who saw an opportunity in a changing political landscape and seized it. They used the tools available to them, their intelligence, their access to the Sultan, their control over the harem to become the de facto rulers of the state. But then consider the counterargument. These women's power, no matter how vast, was always derivative. It flowed from one single source: their relationship with the man, the Sultan. Her EMS power came from Suleiman's love. Urban and Sophia's power came from being the mothers of their sons. Kos EMS regency was only possible because her son was a child. Their authority was not inherent, it was borrowed from a male-held throne. If the Sultan chose to ignore them, or if a rival faction succeeded in placing a different prince on the throne, their power could evaporate in an instant. Furthermore, they were always physically confined. For all their global influence, they could not leave the palace without an elaborate veiled procession. They could not lead an army into battle. They had to operate through intermediaries, eunuchs, cuirass, and male viziers. Were they pulling the strings, or were they merely the most important voice in a system that was still fundamentally controlled by men? And here's a quirky but ambiguous position: the matter of the curtain. When Kosem presided over the divan as regent, she did so from behind a screen. This screen is the perfect metaphor for their power. It allowed her to be present, to listen, but it also enforced her separation. It was a symbol of both her access and her exclusion. She was at the center of power, yet still forming outside of it. This leads to the great, unresolved debate among historians. Were the women of the Sultanate a revolutionary force that subverted the patriarchy, or were they ultimately just a different flavor of the same patriarchal system? One school of thought, often called the decline narrative, argues the latter. They see the Sultanate of women as a period of dysfunction. They claim these women were not true rulers but were for personal and familial ambitions, placing their own son on the throne, enriching their own faction at the expense of the state's well-being. Their rule, based on harem intrigue rather than bureaucratic or military merit, was a sign of the empire's decay, not its strength. A more recent, feminist-inspired interpretation challenges this view. These historians argue that judging these women by male standards of rule is a mistake. They were operating within a completely different set of rules and constraints. Their focus on family and succession wasn't petty selfishness, it was the very basis of the Ottoman political system. The dynasty's survival was the state's well-being. They argue that these women were incredibly successful politicians who mastered the system they were in. To dismiss them as illegitimate or a cause of decline is to ignore their incredible skill and to fall back on old, misogynistic tropes of petticoat rule. The debate rages on. The truth is, you can look at the same set of facts and come to two completely different conclusions. You can see Harry-MS marriage as a great love story and a feminist triumph, or as a foreign slave's clever manipulation of a Sultan. You can see Corsi-MS regency as a period of heroic stabilization, or as a chaotic free-for-all of corruption. As you stand in the quiet courtyards of the palace, you realize there is no easy answer. These women were both powerful and constrained. They were both rulers and prisoners. They were brilliant strategists who were also products of a restrictive system. They were masters of the gilded cage, but it was a cage nonetheless. Their legacy is not a simple story of triumph or failure, but a complex, fascinating paradox that historians are still trying to unravel to this day. The era of Corsi-MS absolute regency eventually comes to an end as her son, Murad IV, comes of age, and he is nothing like his gentle father or his malleable uncles. Murad is a throwback to the warrior sultans of old. He is ruthless, decisive, and determined to restore order to the empire with an iron fist. He seizes the reins of power from his mother, and for the first time in her life, Qasem has to take a step back. Murad launches a brutal campaign to stamp out the corruption and insubordination that had flourished during his childhood. He executes thousands of corrupt officials, bans coffee and tobacco, believing the coffee houses to be centers of sedition, and patrols the streets of Istanbul in disguise at night, personally executing anyone who breaks his strict curfews. He leads his armies from the front, reconquering Baghdad from the Persians in a bloody campaign, feels the grip of a strong male ruler once again. While Murad is on campaign, he entrusts the running of the capital to Qasem. They form a strange but effective partnership. He is the iron fist of the empire, and she is the steady hand managing the government back home. She is still the Validi Sultan, immensely wealthy and respected, but the dynamic has shifted. She advises, but he decides. This period of brutal stability, however, is short-lived. In 1640, Murad IV, the great restorer of order, dies of cirrhosis of the liver at the age of 27. His early death creates yet another succession crisis. Murad has no surviving sons. The only male left in the entire Ottoman dynasty is his younger brother, Ibrahim, who has spent almost his entire life locked away in the Kafes. Ibrahim is, to put it charitably, deeply damaged. He is terrified, paranoid, and has no experience of the outside world. When the palace officials come to the Kafes to tell him he is the new sultan, he is convinced it's a trick and that his brother has sent them to kill him. He barricades the door and persuades him, showing him Murad's dead body to prove that he is truly the sultan. With the mentally fragile Ibrahim on the throne, power once again falls into the hands of Qasem Sultan. She is now the grandmother of the dynasty, the ultimate matriarch, ruling through a son who is completely dependent on her. It seems she is back in her element, the undisputed power behind the throne. But Ibrahim's reign descends into chaos. He is erratic and obsessed with the pleasures of the harem. He is known for his bizarre and extravagant whims. In one infamous incident, he supposedly became so enraged with the gossip and intrigues of his harem that he had all 280 of his junior concubines tied up in sacks and drowned in the Bosporus. While this story is likely an exaggeration spread by his enemies, it gives you a sense of his reputation for cruelty and madness. His erratic behavior and lavish spending drain the treasury and alienate the entire political establishment. Qasim tries to control him to manage his excesses, but he begins to resent her influence. He is the Sultan after all, and he starts listening to other advisors, particularly his new favorite concubines. And one of these concubines gives birth to a son, Mehmed. This young woman's name is Turhan Hatay's. She is of Russian or Ukrainian origin, captured as a young girl, much like her Rem. She is intelligent, ambitious, and she is now the mother of the heir to the throne. A new player has entered the game. The situation becomes untenable. The Janissaries and the government officials have had enough of Ibrahim's madness. In 1648, in another palace coup, they depose him, the fatwa from the chief religious scholar, and they place his 7-year-old son, Mehmed IV, on the throne. Ibrahim is sent back to the Cayfessand. A few days later, with Qasim's reluctant but necessary approval, he is strangled. This should be Qasim's moment of ultimate triumph. Her grandson is now Sultan. As the boy's grandmother, she expects to continue her rule as regent. She is the experienced hand, the grand matriarch. But there's a problem. The new Sultan's mother, Turhan Sultan, is alive and well. And according to tradition, the position of valid Sultan and regent belongs to the mother of the reigning Sultan, not the grandmother. The stage is now set for the final dramatic showdown of the Sultanate of Women. Two queens, one throne. On one side, Qasim Sultan, the most powerful woman in Ottoman history, with decades of experience, immense wealth, and deep connections to the Janissaries. On the other, the young Turhan Sultan, mother of the Sultan, holding the trump card of tradition and legitimacy. The harem is about to be torn apart by a civil war between two of its own. The harem is now a battlefield, and the two opposing generals are Qasim and Turhan. The prize is not just the regency, it's control of the entire Ottoman Empire. The court divides into two camps, and the tension is so thick you could cut it with a jeweled dagger. Qasim holds the initial advantage. She has the experience, the money, and the loyalty of the powerful Janissary core, whom she has patronized for decades. She simply refuses to cede power. She declares herself the senior valide and regent, arguing that her young, inexperienced daughter-in-law is unfit to rule. For a time, her sheer force of will and her deep network of supporters carry the day. She remains the de facto ruler, while Turhan is sidelined, confined to her apartments, a queen in title but not in power. Turhan is only in her early 20s, but she is intelligent and patient. She knows she cannot take on Qasim directly. So she plays a longer game. She begins to build her own coalition of allies. She finds a powerful supporter in the new chief black eunuch, who resents Qasim's long-standing control over the palace. She also gains the backing of many of the Pars has in the divan, including the future Grand Vizier, Kopia Ulu Mehmed Pasha. They see Qasim and her corrupt, crony-filled Janissary faction as the main source of the state's instability. They see Turhan as a chance for a fresh start, a return to order. Her plan is as simple as it is ruthless. She will have her 7-year-old grandson, Sultan Mehmed IV, poisoned. Then, she will place another young grandson, Suleiman, on the throne. Suleiman's mother is a different, more pliable consort, whom Qasim knows she can easily control. At the same time, her loyal Janissaries will storm the palace and eliminate Turhan and all of her key supporters. It is a plan to wipe the chessboard clean in a single bloody night. But Turhan has her own spies. One of Qasim's own servants, a woman named Mileki Hatan, betrays her and reveals the entire plot to Turhan. The young mother now knows she is marked for death, along with her son. She has no choice but to strike first. On the night of September 2, 1651, the final drama unfolds. Turhan, armed with the knowledge of the plot, mobilizes her own faction. Her supporters, led by the chief black eunuch, arm themselves. They move to secure the Sultan's apartments, protecting the young boy from Qasim's assassins. Meanwhile, Qasims Janissary allies begin to gather outside the palace, ready for the signal to attack. But Turhan's faction moves faster. They hunt for Qasim within the labyrinthine corridors of the harem. But she is found. The eunuchs and palace guards loyal to Turhan drag her out. The details of her death are gruesome and contested, a reflection of the chaos of the night. Some accounts say she was strangled with a curtain from her own chamber. Others claim it was with her own hair. She fights back fiercely, a testament to her indomitable will even at the very end. But she is an old woman, and her attackers are many. The death of Sultan is a seismic event. She had dominated the Ottoman stage for half a century. She had been the wife of one sultan, the mother of two more, and the grandmother and regent for a fourth. Her death is the bloody climax of the entire era of the Sultanate of Women. Was this final conflict a personal spat between two ambitious women, or was it something more? This is where historians find deeper meaning. The clash between Qasim and Turhan was not just about personality, it was a battle for the soul of the Ottoman state. One interpretation sees it as the old, corrupt system versus a new, reformist one. Qasim and her Janissary allies represented the entrenched interests, the patronage networks, and the political instability that had plagued the empire for decades. Turhan and her allies and the bureaucracy, like the future Grand Vizier Khosrow, represented a desire for a return to centralized, disciplined, male-dominated administrative rule. Qasim's death was a necessary, if brutal, prerequisite for the reforms that would follow. Another perspective views it through the lens of institutional power. Qasim's power base was the harem and the janissaries. Turhan's power base was the official bureaucracy of the divan and the palace administration, particularly the office of the chief black eunuch. The conflict was a turf war between different power centers within the state. The victory of Turhan's faction signified a permanent shift of power away from the janissaries and back towards the viziers and the palace bureaucracy. The news of Qasim's death spreads through the city. The janissaries, their leader and patroness gone, are thrown into disarray. Turhan Sultan is now the undisputed Valide Sultan and regent for her young son. She has won the war. The harem has a new sole queen. The final act of this long, dramatic play has concluded, and the stage is littered with bodies. With Qasim's body barely cold, a new and unfamiliar quiet settles over the harem. The 50-year storm has passed. Turhan Sultan the victor is now the unchallenged Valide Sultan and regent for her son, Mehmed IV. She has reached the pinnacle of power, just as her predecessors did. But she is a different kind of ruler, shaped by the bloody conflict she has just survived. Turhan seems to have learned a crucial lesson from the chaos. She recognizes that the system of personal rule by Valide, propped up by a network of cronies and rebellious soldiers, is unsustainable. The empire needs stability. It needs a strong, centralized government. And so, in a move that signals the beginning of the end for the Sultanate of Women, she willingly decides to delegate her power. She does this by making a brilliant political choice. In 1656, facing yet another military and financial crisis, she appoints an old, experienced, and fiercely capable administrator as Grand Vizier Khosrow Mehmed Pasha. But Khosrow is no one's puppet. He agrees to take the job only on a set of unprecedented conditions. He demands absolute appointments and dismissals without interference, the power to enact any policies he deems necessary, and a guarantee that the Sultanate, by extension, the Valide Sultan, will support all of his decisions. Turhan agrees. In this single act, she voluntarily transfers the day-to-day running of the government from the harem back to the office of the Grand Vizier. She essentially outsources the ruling of the empire to a competent man. This is a monumental shift. For the past century, the Grand Viziers had been creatures of the harem, appointed and dismissed at the whim of the Valide. Now the Grand Vizier is the one with the power, and the Valide is his patron and supporter. This marks the beginning of what historians call the Tompi, Ulu Mehmed Pasha, and later his son who succeeds him, embarks on a ruthless and effective campaign to restore order. They purge the bureaucracy of corrupt officials, reform the military, stabilize the state finances, and lead successful military campaigns. They are, in effect, co-rulers with the Sultan, creating a new dynasty of powerful Grand Viziers. And what of Turhan? She does not simply disappear. She remains an immensely powerful and respected Valide Sultan. But her power is exercised differently. She retreats from the front line of politics and focuses on to key areas, acting as the ultimate guarantor of the KOP-RUAU administration and embarking on a massive program of architectural patronage. She is the steady, legitimizing presence behind the throne, ensuring her son supports the tough measures of his Grand Vizier. Her greatest legacy is architectural. She completes a project that had been started by Sophia Sultan decades earlier but was abandoned, the magnificent Yeni Cami, or New Mosque, which still dominates the Istanbul skyline at the foot of the Galata Bridge. The complex is enormous, including not just the mosque but also a school, a public fountain, a library, and the now famous Spice Bazaar. Here's a curious detail about its construction. The mosque was built in a waterfront neighborhood that had a large Jewish population. To clear the land for this massive project, the state expropriated the property of many Jewish families and synagogues. While they were compensated, the project was seen by some as an aggressive assertion of Islamic imperial power in a diverse part of the city. For Turhan, however, completing this grand mosque on such a prominent site was a way to cement her legacy as a pious, powerful, and orthodox Muslim ruler, perhaps consciously distancing herself from the chaotic and controversial reigns of her predecessors. The completion of the Yeni Cami in 1665 is, in many ways, the symbolic end of the Sultanate of Women. It is the last of the great imperial mosques built by a Valide Sultan. It represents the final, grand flourishing of female power before that power recedes back into the shadows of the harem. Did Turhan kill the Sultanate of Women, or was the era already dying on its own? This is a final, fascinating historical debate. One perspective holds that Turhan was the restorer of order who consciously, unwisely put an end to the illegitimate rule of women. She saw the damage that harem-based governance had done and made a patriotic choice to hand power back to the proper male administrators. In this narrative, she is the heroine who sacrifices her own potential for absolute rule for the good of the state. Another, more nuanced, view argues that the era was already collapsing under its own weight. The decades of infighting, corruption, and instability had delegitimized the harem's political role. The economic and military crises facing the empire required a different kind of leadership that the harem-based system could no longer provide. Turhan wasn't a visionary who ended the era, she was a pragmatist who recognized it was already over. Her alliance with the KOP-RUAU was not a noble sacrifice but a savvy political move to secure her own position and her son's throne in a changing world. She didn't kill the system, she presided over its funeral and helped design the new one that would replace it. As Turhan grows old and her son, Mehmed IV, matures, the harem returns to what it had been before her harem kicked down the door: a private, domestic space. A place for raising heirs, not for running an empire. The Valide Sultan remains a respected and influential figure, but her power is once again informal, personal, and largely confined to the palace walls. The curtain has fallen. The great century-long experiment in female rule has come to an end. The dust of that final, bloody confrontation settles. The centuries roll by, fast and slow, like the currents of the Bosporus. The empire itself, once seeming eternal, becomes a memory, a chapter in a history book. And you find yourself standing here now in the heart of modern Istanbul. The roar of the city is different, the clang of trams, the hum of traffic, the chatter of 1,000 languages from tourists and locals alike. But if you listen closely underneath it all, you can still hear the echoes. You start your walk near the Grand Bazaar, and you find at the Hosek, I Harem Sultan Kala, yes I. It's still here. The soup kitchen she built, the hospital. You can touch the cool stones that she commanded into place. This is where she, the slave girl from a land of snow, stamped her identity onto the heart of the empire. You think of her journey, from a terrified girl to a laughing queen who married a sultan and changed the world, and you think about her legacy. Here in Turkey, her name, her harem, is still legendary. For some, she is a symbol of love and female power. But for others, especially those who romanticize the figure of the perfect Prince Mustafa, she is still the Russian witch, the beautiful, scheming foreigner who destroyed the dynasty's brightest hope for her own ambition. This folklore, this duology of her as both saint and sorceress, is a living part of her story that has outlasted the stones themselves. You wander down towards the water, towards the chaos and color of the Yemenoni waterfront. And there it is, rising majestically against the sky, the Yenikomi, the new mosque. Its great domes and slender minarets are all unmarked, a postcard image of the city. You remember its story, started by the ambitious Sophia, a gift for her son, a project so massive, it was left to languish for half a century. And then finished by Turhan, the woman who defeated Qasem, as her own grand statement of power and piety. You walk into the attached spice bazaar, the MSR cars. The air is thick with the scent of cinnamon, saffron, and tea. This bustling, vibrant market, a river of commerce that flows to this day, is a direct, living legacy of Turhan Sultan's reign. She didn't just build a monument, she built an economic engine that still hums with life. Not far away, near the iconic Blue Mosque, you can find the tombs of Sultan Ahmadai and his most beloved consort, Hertian, Hertiurab, is grand but perhaps not as imposing as the mosque complexes of her predecessors. Her legacy was less in stone and more in action. She was the great regent, the ultimate politician. Her story is so dramatic, so full of intrigue, love, and bloodshed, that it has become the subject of wildly popular Turkish television dramas, watched by millions. The girl Anastasia has been reborn in the 21st century as a prime-time heroine, her life a modern epic. Standing here, amidst the ghosts of these women, you return to that fundamental question: how should we remember them? Were they feminist icons, brilliant women who shattered the glass ceiling of their time, proving that a woman could rule an empire as effectively as any man? Do these mosques stand as monuments to their strength and vision? Or are these buildings monuments to a dysfunctional system? Are they the beautiful fruits of a corrupt tree, paid for by the selling of offices and the hollowing out of the state? Was the Sultanate of women a golden age of female power, or was it a century of decline masked by the splendor of a few remarkable individuals? This is the debate that still animates the halls of academia and the tour guides who walk these streets. There is no simple answer, no easy label. These women were not cardboard cutouts. They were complex, contradictory figures, pious and ruthless, charitable and greedy, loving mothers and cold-blooded political operators. They were prisoners who became rulers, slaves who became queens. As the evening call to prayer begins to echo from a dozen minarets, a sound that has cascaded over these hills for centuries, you look at the stones and you listen to the whispers. The stones tell a story of power, wealth, and permanence. The whispers, the legends, the debates, they tell a story of ambition, struggle, and the enduring, complicated legacy of the women who once ruled the world from inside a golden cage. And so our journey through the gilded cage comes to a gentle close. The echoes of Istanbul begin to fade, replaced by the soft, familiar quiet of your own room. The grand domes and latticed screens dissolve, leaving only the gentle slope of your pillow, the weight of your blanket. The whispers of pause and the rustle of silk gowns melt away into the soft hum of the fan, or the distant sound of the city settling down for the night. Let the stories drift now like smoke from an incense burner, leaving behind only a faint, pleasant scent in your memory. Hurry MS laughter, and Urbanus quiet grace, Sophie yes calculating eyes, and Cossy MS indomitable, well, they are all just characters now in a dream that you are beginning to have. They have played their parts on the grand stage of history, and now the curtain has fallen, the lights have dimmed, and the theater is empty. There is no need to hold on to the details, to the names or the dates. Just let the feeling remain, a sense of time flowing like a great river, of lives lived with passion and purpose. Feel the tension in your shoulders release. Let your breathing slow down, becoming as rhythmic and steady as the tides of the Bosporus we just left behind. You are safe now, far from the intrigues of the court, resting in the quiet sanctuary of your own bed. There are no more stories to tell tonight, no more secrets to uncover. There is only this stillness, this peace, this gentle slide into the soft and welcoming darkness of a deep, restful sleep. The end of the article. Good night.